Tonight, we'll be drifting through the mysterious world of Pokémon fan theories, exploring the countless stories and connections that players have discovered hidden within familiar games. Find a comfortable position, let your body relax, and allow your mind to wander as we examine these modern myths that have grown around the Pokémon universe. From shadowy connections between seemingly unrelated creatures to questions of identity that blur the line between human and Pokémon. Each theory will gently guide you deeper into contemplation and rest. There's no need to solve these mysteries. Just let their quiet wonder carry you toward sleep. Throughout the decades since Pokémon first captured our imagination, fans have woven together theories that feel almost like folklore, passed down from playground to internet forum like ancient stories told around campfires. These theories represent something deeper than mere speculation. They reflect our human desire to find meaning in the unexplained, to discover hidden connections in the world around us, and to believe that there are always more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Tonight, we'll explore some of the most enduring of these theories. Not to prove or disprove them, but to understand what they reveal about our relationship with the stories we love. The first theory we encounter draws us into a world of shadows and reflections, where two Pokémon that seem completely unrelated might share a connection as old as light and darkness themselves. Consider Gengar and Clefable, two creatures that appear to have nothing in common at first glance. Gengar lurks in shadows, a ghost-type Pokémon known for its mischievous and sometimes malevolent nature. Clefable dances under moonlight, a fairy type beloved for its gentle disposition and connection to celestial bodies. Yet, when you place their sprites side by side, something curious emerges. Both Pokémon share remarkably similar body shapes. Their ears curve into identical points, almost like small horns crowning their rounded heads. Their backs feature the same spiky protrusions, creating silhouettes that mirror each other in unexpected ways. Even their posture feels familiar. That slightly hunched stance with arms positioned in nearly identical ways. The theory suggests that Gengar might be the shadow of Clefable, or perhaps a corrupted version of the fairy Pokémon, twisted by some unknown darkness into its spectral form. This connection becomes even more intriguing when we consider their typings and behaviors. Clefable was originally a normal type Pokémon before the fairy type was introduced, representing something pure and untainted. Gengar, meanwhile, embodies the ghost type, dwelling in shadows and feeding off the fear of others. In many mythologies, shadows are not merely absence of light, but active entities, dark reflections of the beings that cast them. Could Gengar represent the shadow that Clefable casts, given form and consciousness through some ancient magic or cosmic event? The visual similarities extend beyond just their basic shapes. Both Pokémon have small, almost vestigial wing-like appendages. Clefable's are barely visible, tiny pink nubs that suggest a connection to its pre-evolution Clefairy's more prominent wings. Gengar's spiky back protrusions could be interpreted as corrupted or withered wings, transformed by whatever force changed a once gentle fairy into a mischievous ghost. Their hands tell a similar story, both sporting 3 fingers that end in small points, though Clefable's are soft and rounded while Gengar's appear more claw-like. Even their eyes seem to echo this shadow relationship. Clefable's eyes are large and innocent, filled with curiosity and kindness. Gengar's eyes gleam with mischief and hidden knowledge, as if they've seen the darker truths that lurk behind the bright facade of the Pokémon world. They're different expressions of the same basic feature, one representing wonder and the other representing knowing. The theory gains another layer when we consider the environments where these Pokémon are found. Clefable appears on Mount Moon, drawn to the mysterious properties of moonstones and the celestial energy that flows through that sacred space. Gengar haunts abandoned buildings, old mansions, and places where the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin. Light and shadow, sacred and profane, celestial and earthbound. They represent opposing forces that nonetheless share the same fundamental shape. Some fans have suggested that this connection runs even deeper, proposing that every Clefable creates a Gengar as its shadow, or that Gengar are what remains when Clefable succumbed to some terrible fate. The idea has a poetic resonance that speaks to universal themes of duality and balance. In many philosophical traditions, light cannot exist without darkness, and joy is meaningless without sorrow. Perhaps Pokémon, being creatures of such pure elemental essence, naturally create these opposing pairs. Yet as we drift deeper into this theory, we must acknowledge its limitations. The visual similarities, while striking, could simply be the result of shared design influences or the creative constraints of early Pokémon sprite work. Many Generation 1 Pokémon share similar features because they were created by the same artists working within the technical limitations of the Game Boy. The pointed ears, spiky backs, and rounded bodies might reflect nothing more than the aesthetic preferences of their creators. Still, there's something deeply satisfying about this theory that transcends logical analysis. It speaks to our understanding of balance and opposition, the way light defines shadow, and shadow gives meaning to light. In our quiet moments of contemplation, we can imagine a world where these connections are real, where Clefable and Gengar exist in eternal dance of opposition and complement, forever linked across the boundary between fairy tale and ghost story. The theory also reflects our relationship with the unknown aspects of ourselves. Clefable represents our innocent, hopeful nature, the part of us that believes in magic and wishes on stars. Gengar embodies our shadow self, the mischievous impulses and darker knowledge that we keep hidden, but which nonetheless shape who we are. The Pokémon become metaphors for the complexity of consciousness itself, the way we all contain multitudes of seemingly contradictory elements. As we move from shadows to another form of mystery, we encounter a theory that questions the very nature of identity in the Pokémon world. This theory centers around N, the enigmatic green-haired trainer from the Unova region, and his unusual connection to a particular Pokémon. N possesses the remarkable ability to understand Pokémon speech, something that sets him apart from nearly every other human character in the series. His unusual upbringing, raised by Pokémon rather than humans, might explain this gift, but some fans have proposed a more radical explanation. The theory suggests that N might not be human at all, but rather a Zoroark, using its illusion abilities to disguise itself as a person. This idea emerged from careful observation of N's behavior and the curious frequency with which Zoroark appears in situations connected to him. The evidence, while circumstantial, creates a compelling pattern that has captivated fans for over a decade. Consider N's physical appearance and mannerisms. His long green hair flows in a way that's reminiscent of Zoroark's distinctive mane. His movements have an almost feline grace, fluid and precise in a way that suggests something other than human. Most tellingly, his ability to communicate with Pokémon goes beyond simple understanding. He seems to think like a Pokémon, viewing the world through their perspective rather than imposing human concepts upon their behavior. The connection becomes more explicit when we examine the role of Zoroark in the Black and White games. A Zoroark appears at crucial moments in N's story, often in places where we might expect to encounter N himself. In the sequel games, Black 2 and White 2, players can unlock flashback sequences through the memory link feature. Most of these flashbacks are narrated by human characters who witnessed the events. But one significant flashback is initiated by a Zoroark that doesn't appear in the actual sequence. Only Team Plasma grunts and N. Even more intriguingly, when players explore the ruins of Team Plasma's castle in the sequel games, a Zoroark guides them through the crumbling structure, leading them deeper into the ruins where they eventually find N waiting. The Pokémon's behavior suggests intimate knowledge of the location and a personal investment in helping the player reach N. This goes beyond the typical behavior of a wild Pokémon and suggests a deeper connection. Zoroark's signature ability, Illusion, allows it to perfectly mimic the appearance of other Pokémon. But the lore suggests their abilities extend far beyond simple visual disguise. In the Lostlorn Forest, players can encounter what appears to be a traveling backpacker who engages them in normal conversation before revealing himself to be a Zoroark. This demonstrates that Zoroark can not only look human, but can speak human language and understand human behavior well enough to maintain a convincing conversation. The theory becomes even more compelling when we consider N's origins and behavior patterns. He was raised by Getsis and Team Plasma, but his true origins remain mysterious. He rotates his Pokémon team constantly, releasing creatures after brief partnerships and forming new bonds with wild Pokémon he encounters. This behavior mirrors Zoroark's natural tendency to move through different territories and adapt to various situations using its illusion abilities. N's philosophy about Pokémon liberation also aligns with how a Pokémon might view the relationship between trainers and their captured creatures. His arguments come from a perspective that prioritizes Pokémon autonomy and freedom, values that would naturally appeal to a creature like Zoroark, which relies on its independence and adaptability to survive in the wild. His emotional distance from human concepts like permanent ownership or long-term planning could reflect a fundamentally different way of understanding relationships and time. The opening credits of Black and White provide another intriguing piece of evidence. We see N as a child alongside various Pokémon, including a Zorua, Darumaka, and Woobat, while the other Pokémon in these scenes represent species that N uses in battle. Zorua is conspicuously absent from his actual team, despite this apparent early connection. Some theorists suggest this is because the Zorua didn't remain as a separate entity, but rather was always N himself, the scene representing not a trainer with his Pokémon, but a young Zoroark learning to use its abilities alongside other creatures. Yet as we examine this theory more closely, alternative explanations emerge that might be equally compelling. N's ability to understand Pokémon could stem from his unique upbringing and the trauma of being manipulated by Getsis. His connection to Zoroark might represent not shared identity, but rather a deep bond with a Pokémon that understands deception and hidden truth as well as he does. The Zoroark that appears throughout the Black and White games might be a companion who has chosen to stay near N, despite his philosophy of releasing Pokémon after brief partnerships. This would explain the creature's intimate knowledge of Team Plasma's facilities and its willingness to guide players to find N. Rather than being N in disguise, it could be a loyal friend who shares his ideals and works alongside him even when they're separated. This interpretation carries its own emotional resonance. N, raised to believe that Pokémon and humans should remain separate, nonetheless forms a bond so strong with one Pokémon that it chooses to stay near him despite his stated beliefs. The Zoroark becomes a silent testament to the power of friendship to transcend even the most rigid philosophical boundaries. The backpacker in Lostlorn Forest might simply be an unrelated Zoroark, demonstrating the species' natural behavior rather than evidence of N's true nature. Zoroark are known to be curious about humans and might naturally experiment with mimicking human behavior for their own entertainment or protection. As we drift deeper into contemplation of these theories, we begin to see how they function as more than simple speculation about fictional characters. They represent our fascination with questions of identity and authenticity, our desire to find deeper meaning in the stories we love, and our recognition that the most interesting characters are often those whose true nature remains partially hidden. Whether N is human or Pokémon becomes less important than what the theory reveals about our understanding of connection and communication. The bond between N and the Pokémon he encounters transcends typical trainer and Pokémon relationships, precisely because it exists outside normal human frameworks. If he is human, he represents the possibility of truly understanding non-human consciousness. If he is Pokémon, he demonstrates the potential for non-human intelligence to navigate and even improve human society. The theory also speaks to themes of belonging and identity that resonate beyond the Pokémon world. N's struggle to understand his place in the world, caught between human and Pokémon societies, mirrors the experience of anyone who has felt caught between different communities or ways of being. Whether his outsider status comes from unusual upbringing or species difference, the emotional truth of his journey remains the same. In the quiet space between waking and sleep, these questions of identity and illusion take on a dreamlike quality. We can imagine a world where the boundaries between human and Pokémon become fluid, where understanding transcends species, and where the deepest truths are often hidden behind layers of illusion and misdirection. En and Zoroark, whether separate beings or the same entity, represent the possibility of connection that goes beyond surface appearances to touch something fundamental about consciousness and communication. As these theories settle into our minds like gentle rain, we find ourselves drifting toward the mysteries that lie deeper in Pokémon lore, toward questions about time and transformation that speak to the very heart of what it means to change and grow. The shadows lengthen, the illusions fade, and we prepare to journey even further into the hidden connections that bind the Pokémon world together. As we drift deeper into the realm of Pokémon mysteries, we encounter theories that reach back through the mists of time, connecting modern Pokémon to ancient origins and forgotten histories. These stories speak to our fascination with the deep past and the ways in which trauma and transformation can echo across centuries, creating connections that transcend the normal boundaries of species and evolution. The first of these ancient connections draws us into the world of prehistoric Pokémon and the mysteries surrounding a creature known as Genesect. This mechanical-looking Pokémon carries the weight of eons within its metal shell, a living relic of a time when the world was young and very different from the one we know today. According to the official lore, Genesect was once an ancient bug Pokémon that lived 300 million years ago, revered and feared as the ultimate hunter of its era. Team Plasma discovered fossilized remains of this creature and used advanced technology to resurrect and modify it, outfitting the revived Pokémon with metallic armor and a powerful cannon that transforms it into a formidable weapon. But this official story raises more questions than it answers. What was Genesect before Team Plasma's modifications? What did this ancient hunter look like in its original form, before metal plates covered its organic body and artificial weapons replaced its natural armaments? Some fans have proposed a compelling answer to these questions, one that connects Genesect to a Pokémon we've known since the very beginning of the franchise. The theory suggests that Genesect's original form was none other than Kabutops, the evolved form of the dome fossil Pokémon Kabuto. At first, this connection might seem unlikely. Kabutops is classified as a rock and water type, while Genesect is explicitly described as an ancient bug Pokémon. Yet when we examine the evidence more closely, a pattern emerges that suggests these two creatures might be more closely related than their current typings would indicate. The physical similarities between Kabutops and Genesect are striking when viewed with fresh eyes. Both Pokémon share the same basic body structure, with elongated torsos, powerful limbs, and distinctive head shapes that suggest a common evolutionary origin. Their posture and stance are nearly identical, the way they hold their bodies conveying the same sense of predatory readiness and ancient power. Even the proportions of their limbs follow the same patterns, creating silhouettes that echo each other across the vast expanse of geological time. More compelling still are the behavioral parallels described in their Pokédex entries. Genesect is consistently portrayed as a supreme hunter, a creature that dominated its prehistoric ecosystem through superior predatory skills. Kabutops shares this reputation, with multiple Pokédex entries describing it as a vicious hunter that used its sharp scythe-like arms to slice through prey. Both Pokémon are depicted as apex predators, creatures so perfectly adapted to hunting that they became the dominant species of their respective eras. The timeline also aligns in fascinating ways. Genesect is said to have lived 300 million years ago, during what would correspond to the Carboniferous period in our world's geological history. While Kabutops doesn't have entries specifying exactly when it lived, its pre-evolution Kabuto is specifically described as existing 300 million years ago in several Pokédex entries. The temporal connection creates another thread linking these two seemingly disparate Pokémon across the vast stretch of deep time. Perhaps most intriguingly, both Pokémon are connected to the same prehistoric arthropod groups that dominated ancient seas. Kabuto is clearly based on trilobites and horseshoe crabs, while Kabutops draws inspiration from eurypterids, the giant sea scorpions that were among the most fearsome predators of the Paleozoic era. Genesect, despite its current mechanical appearance, retains the basic arthropod body plan and the predatory adaptations that would have made it the ultimate hunter of its time. The typing discrepancy that initially seems to contradict this theory actually supports it when examined more carefully. Kabutops is rock and water type, but this classification likely reflects its current status as a fossil Pokémon rather than its original typing when it was alive. The rock typing appears to be an artifact of the fossilization and revival process, a consequence of being preserved in stone for millions of years, rather than an indication of its original elemental nature. Consider the pattern established by other fossil Pokémon. Anorith and Armaldo, both prehistoric arthropods, like the proposed original Genesect, are classified as rock and bug types. These Pokémon demonstrate that arthropods from the distant past could indeed possess bug typing, suggesting that a living Kabutops from 300 million years ago might have been water and bug type rather than rock and water type. The aquatic environment that Kabutops inhabited would account for the water typing, while its arthropod nature would explain the bug typing that Genesect retained even after Team Plasma's modifications. The theory gains additional support from Kabutops' move pool, which includes several bug-type attacks that seem oddly out of place for a rock and water-type Pokémon. Kabutops can learn X-Scissor and Leech Life, the latter by natural level progression, and in earlier generations it could also learn Fury Cutter. These bug-type moves make little sense for a rock-type Pokémon, but would be perfectly natural for a creature that was originally bug-type before fossilization changed its elemental classification. Team Plasma's modifications to the revived Genesect would have replaced much of its organic matter with mechanical components. But the underlying body structure and predatory instincts remained unchanged. The cannon mounted on its back serves the same function as Kabutops' scythe arms, providing a means to dispatch prey quickly and efficiently. The metallic armor that covers Genesect's body mirrors the chitinous exoskeleton that would have protected the original creature, updated with modern materials but serving the same defensive purpose. This theory speaks to deeper themes about the relationship between past and present, the ways in which ancient forms can be recovered and reimagined through the lens of modern technology. Genesect represents not just resurrection, but transformation. The idea that something from the distant past can be brought forward and given new purpose, while still retaining the essential characteristics that made it formidable in its original era. The connection also reflects our fascination with prehistoric life and the desire to understand how ancient creatures lived and hunted. By linking Genesect to Kabutops, the theory creates a bridge between the familiar fossil Pokémon we can revive and train and the almost mythical ancient hunter that dominated prehistoric seas. It transforms Kabutops from a simple fossil revival into something more significant, a glimpse of what the ultimate prehistoric predator might have looked like in its prime. As we contemplate this ancient connection, our thoughts naturally turn to another theory that deals with transformation across time, but one rooted in tragedy rather than scientific resurrection. This theory takes us to the Johto region, and one of the most beloved legends in Pokémon lore. The story of the Brass Tower and the three legendary beasts that emerged from its ashes. The official story of Raikou, Entei, and Suicune begins with catastrophe. 150 years before the events of the Gold and Silver Games, lightning struck the Brass Tower in Ecruteak City, igniting a fire that consumed the ancient structure. The blaze was so intense that it forced the legendary Pokémon Ho-Oh to flee from its roost atop the tower, seeking refuge in the distant Whirl Islands. 3 Pokémon perished in the flames, their lives cut short by the sudden disaster that befell their sacred home. But the story doesn't end with death. As the fire raged and seemed unstoppable, a sudden rainfall extinguished the flames, saving what remained of the tower and the surrounding city. Ho-Oh, witnessing the tragedy from afar, returned to the scene of destruction and performed an act of divine compassion. Using its legendary power over life and death, Ho-Oh resurrected the 3 fallen Pokémon, transforming them in the process into the legendary beasts we know today. Raikou embodies the lightning that started the fire. Entei represents the flames that consumed the tower, and Suicune symbolizes the rain that finally brought peace. This official account establishes the legendary beasts as unique creations, Pokémon that became legendary through their resurrection and transformation. But it leaves one crucial question unanswered. What were these three Pokémon before they died? The theory that has captured the imagination of fans for decades provides a beautiful and compelling answer to this mystery. The theory suggests that the three Pokémon who perished in the Brass Tower fire were Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon, the three original evolutions. This connection transforms the already poignant story into something even more emotionally resonant, creating a narrative of loss, transformation, and rebirth that speaks to universal themes of grief and healing. The evidence supporting this theory is remarkably comprehensive, touching on everything from visual design to statistical distributions to hidden game mechanics that were never fully implemented. The most obvious connection lies in the type matchings, which align perfectly between the evolutions and the legendary beasts. Jolteon's electric typing corresponds to Raikou's electric nature. Flareon's fire typing matches Entei's flames, and Vaporeon's water typing mirrors Suicune's aquatic powers. But the connections run much deeper than simple elemental alignment. The physical resemblances between the paired Pokémon are subtle but consistent. Jolteon and Raikou share the same vibrant yellow coloration, punctuated by white markings that appear in similar patterns across their bodies. Both Pokémon sport prominent manes that seem to crackle with electrical energy, though Raikou's is larger and more elaborate, befitting its legendary status. Flareon and Entei both display the warm colors of flame, with Flareon's orange and red fur echoing in Entei's brown and tan coat. Most notably, both Pokémon feature a distinctive tuft or crest on their foreheads, positioned in exactly the same location and serving as a focal point for their designs. Vaporeon and Suicune present perhaps the most elegant visual connection. Vaporeon's three-pointed fin arrangement finds its echo in Suicune's distinctive three-pointed crest, as if the aquatic evolution's defining feature had been transformed and elevated in the legendary beast. Both Pokémon embody fluid grace and serene power, their designs evoking the calm surface of deep water and the purifying nature of rain. The statistical evidence provides another layer of support for the theory. Jolteon and Raikou share nearly identical stat distributions, both focusing on speed and special attack in ways that make them function similarly in battle. When Jolteon defeats an opponent, it provides 2 speed effort values to the victorious trainer's team, while Raikou offers the same reward, as if their essential nature remained unchanged despite their transformation. Flareon and Entei follow a similar pattern, both emphasizing physical attack power and both providing 2 attack effort values when defeated. Vaporeon and Suicune don't match as precisely in their offensive capabilities, but both Pokémon excel in defensive statistics and provide effort values only in bulk-related stats. Their role as walls and support Pokémon remains consistent across their supposed transformation, suggesting that the core personality and battling style of the original Pokémon survived the resurrection process. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from a hidden mechanic that was programmed into the games but never made available to players. In Generations 5 and 6, data miners discovered that Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon all had hidden abilities coded into the game data: Volt Absorb, Flash Fire, and Water Absorb, respectively. These abilities would allow each Pokémon to absorb attacks of their own type, converting damage into healing or stat boosts. The legendary beasts, meanwhile, were given pressure as their standard ability, a fitting choice for legendary Pokémon that represents their imposing presence and the extra energy required to battle against them. But buried in the same data files, the beasts also had the same hidden abilities as their proposed evolution counterparts: Volt Absorb for Raikou, Flash Fire for Entei, and Water Absorb for Suicune. These hidden abilities were never distributed through official events or made available through normal gameplay, remaining as ghost code that seems to hint at the connections between the two groups of Pokémon. The fact that these abilities were programmed but never released suggests that the development team was aware of the fan theory and may have included these hidden connections as a subtle acknowledgement of the community's creativity. The abilities create a perfect parallel between the evolutions and the legendary beasts, implying a shared origin that transcends their current legendary status. The setting of the theory adds another layer of poetic resonance to the connection. Ecruteak City is known for its connection to traditional dance and cultural performances, particularly the elegant movements of the kimono girls who perform in the dance hall. Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon would have been perfect partners for such performers, their graceful movements and elemental powers complementing the artistic traditions of the city. We can imagine these three Pokémon living peacefully in Ecruteak City, perhaps as partners to the kimono dancers, or simply as beloved residents of the community that gathered around the sacred towers. Their presence in the brass tower during the lightning strike becomes not just tragic coincidence, but a reflection of their deep connection to the spiritual heart of the city. They died protecting or inhabiting a place that meant something to them, making their resurrection by Ho-Oh not just an act of divine mercy, but a recognition of their worthiness and devotion. The transformation wrought by Ho-Oh elevated these beloved community members into legendary status, but it also changed them in ways that speak to the nature of trauma and healing. The legendary beasts are more powerful than their original forms, but they're also more isolated, their legendary status setting them apart from normal Pokémon society. They gained the ability to roam freely across the land, but they lost the close community connections that defined their original existence. This aspect of the theory reflects deeper truths about how we process loss and transformation. The Pokémon who died in the fire could not simply be restored to their original forms, because death changes everything, even when it's reversed. Ho-Oh's resurrection gave them new life, but it was necessarily different life, marked by the experience of loss and the weight of legendary responsibility. They became symbols of the elements that destroyed and saved them, carrying within their new forms the memory of that terrible night. The legendary beasts' behavior in the games supports this interpretation. They roam constantly, never staying in one place for long, as if they're searching for something they can never quite find. This restlessness could represent their struggle to reconnect with a world that has moved on without them, their attempt to find new purpose after losing their original place in the community. Their legendary status isolates them, making them objects of awe and pursuit rather than companions and friends. Yet the theory also offers hope. The legendary beasts retained their essential natures despite their transformation. Raiku's speed, Entei's strength, and Suicune's grace all echo the characteristics that defined them as evolutions. The bonds of friendship and community that connected them in life transcend even death and resurrection, binding them together as they roam the world in their new forms. As we contemplate this beautiful and tragic theory, we're reminded of how the best Pokémon stories work on multiple levels. On the surface, it's a tale of legendary Pokémon and their mysterious origins. Beneath that, it's a story about loss, transformation, and the ways in which love can transcend even the most dramatic changes. The theory doesn't diminish the legendary beasts by connecting them to more common Pokémon. Instead, it elevates the evolutions by suggesting that their capacity for love and loyalty was so pure that it caught the attention of a legendary Pokémon capable of granting new life. The connection between ancient and modern, between ordinary and legendary, between death and rebirth, creates a tapestry of meaning that enriches our understanding of the Pokémon world. These theories don't just explain mysterious connections between different creatures. They reveal the deeper currents of emotion and meaning that flow beneath the surface of the games, the ways in which every Pokémon carries within it the potential for transformation and transcendence. As the echoes of these ancient stories settle into our minds, we find ourselves drifting toward even deeper mysteries, toward theories that question the very nature of creation and the possibility that even failed experiments can find their place in the grand design of the Pokémon world. As we drift deeper into the mysteries of Pokémon creation, we encounter theories that explore the possibility of mistakes and failed experiments, stories that suggest even the most beloved creatures in the Pokémon world might have origins rooted in scientific errors or evolutionary accidents. These theories carry a different kind of beauty than those we've explored before, one that finds meaning in imperfection and discovers how failures can sometimes create something entirely new and wonderful. The first of these theories draws us into the secretive world of genetic research, and the ambitious attempts to recreate legendary Pokémon through artificial means. Hidden away on Cinnabar Island, deep within the abandoned Pokémon Mansion, scientists once conducted experiments that would change the Pokémon world forever. Their goal was audacious: to clone the mythical Pokémon Mew and create a being of even greater power. The official story tells us that these experiments eventually succeeded, producing Mewtwo, a Pokémon whose psychic abilities surpassed even those of its genetic template. But success rarely comes without failure, and the theory we explore tonight suggests that one of Pokémon's most common and beloved creatures might actually be the result of an early, unsuccessful attempt at cloning Mew. Ditto, the transformed Pokémon, possesses one of the most remarkable abilities in the entire Pokémon world. This small pink blob can perfectly mimic the appearance and abilities of any Pokémon it encounters, shifting its cellular structure to match even the most complex forms. At first glance, Ditto appears to be nothing more than a curious novelty, a Pokémon whose primary value lies in its ability to breed with almost any other species. Yet when we examine Ditto more closely, patterns emerge that suggest a connection to something far more significant than its humble appearance would suggest. The physical similarities between Ditto and Mew provide the foundation for this theory. Both Pokémon share the same soft pink coloration in their normal forms, a hue that's relatively uncommon among Pokémon and particularly distinctive when it appears as the primary color scheme. More striking still, both Ditto and Mew appear in the same pale blue shade when they manifest as shiny Pokémon, a color variation so specific and unusual that it seems unlikely to be coincidental. The probability of two unrelated Pokémon sharing both normal and shiny colorations by pure chance is remarkably small, suggesting some deeper connection between them. The abilities that define these Pokémon offer even more compelling evidence for their relationship. Transform is an incredibly rare move in the Pokémon world, learned naturally by only two species, Ditto and Mew. This exclusivity is particularly significant when we consider how many thousands of Pokémon exist across all generations and regions. For such a complex and powerful ability to appear in only two creatures suggests either an extremely unlikely evolutionary coincidence or a direct genetic connection between them. Mew's lore describes it as possessing the genetic code of all Pokémon, allowing it to learn any move and adapt to any situation through its natural shape-shifting abilities. Ditto demonstrates a similar but more limited version of this adaptability, able to copy any Pokémon's form and moveset, but requiring visual contact with its target to maintain the transformation. It's as if Ditto possesses a corrupted or incomplete version of Mew's genetic flexibility, retaining the core ability while losing the refinement and stability that makes Mew truly legendary. The instability of Ditto's transformations provides another clue to its possible artificial origins. While Mew can effortlessly shift between forms and maintain perfect disguises indefinitely, Ditto's transformations are notably imperfect. Its facial features often remain unchanged even when copying another Pokémon, and its transformations require constant concentration to maintain. This suggests a flawed replication of Mew's natural abilities, the kind of imperfection we might expect from an early attempt at genetic engineering using incomplete data or primitive techniques. The location where Ditto can first be found adds crucial context to this theory. In Pokémon Yellow and subsequent Kanto games, Ditto appears exclusively in the basement levels of the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island, the same facility where Mew cloning experiments were conducted. This placement is far from arbitrary. Ditto doesn't simply wander into the mansion from the surrounding areas, but appears to be an integral part of the location's ecosystem, as if it belongs there in some fundamental way. The basement of the Pokémon Mansion tells the story of ambitious scientific research gone wrong. Scattered documents and journal entries reveal the progression of the cloning experiments, from early failures to the eventual breakthrough that created Mewtwo. The presence of Ditto in this environment suggests that these pink, blob-like creatures might be remnants of those early experiments, failed clones that nonetheless achieved a form of life and found a way to survive in the ruins of their birthplace. The reproductive capabilities of Ditto provide another piece of this puzzle. Unlike most Pokémon, Ditto can breed with virtually any other species, producing offspring that belong to the partner species rather than creating more Ditto. This unusual reproductive pattern mirrors what we might expect from an artificial organism designed to carry genetic material from multiple sources. Ditto functions almost like a universal genetic carrier, able to combine its malleable DNA with that of other Pokémon to produce viable offspring. Yet Ditto cannot breed with other Ditto, a restriction that seems to contradict its otherwise universal compatibility. This limitation makes more sense when viewed through the lens of artificial creation. If Ditto were indeed failed clones, sharing the same artificial genetic template, their inability to reproduce with each other might reflect the instability of their shared genetic code or deliberate programming to prevent them from creating a self-sustaining population of experimental creatures. The theory gains additional support from Ditto's behavior in the wild. These Pokémon rarely form social groups or complex communities like most other species. Instead, they tend to live solitary lives, adapting to their environment by mimicking the Pokémon around them. This social isolation could reflect their artificial origins and the confusion that might naturally arise from not having a true species identity to anchor their behavior and instincts. Ditto's distribution pattern across different regions also supports the failed clone hypothesis. These Pokémon appear in scattered locations around the world, often in unusual habitats that don't seem specifically suited to any particular ecological niche. This scattered presence could result from Ditto's remarkable adaptability, allowing them to survive in diverse environments, or it might reflect the distribution of research facilities where cloning experiments were conducted, with surviving Ditto spreading from multiple points of origin. The timeline of Ditto's discovery aligns with this theory as well. Despite being relatively common in modern times, Ditto doesn't appear in the earliest Kanto games, Red and Blue, suggesting that they might be a relatively recent addition to the Pokémon ecosystem. Their appearance in later games could represent the emergence of these creatures from the laboratory environment where they were created, finally spreading into the wider world as the abandoned research facilities deteriorated. The emotional implications of this theory add depth to our understanding of Ditto as more than just a convenient breeding tool or novelty Pokémon. If Ditto are indeed failed attempts at recreating Mew, they represent something profoundly poignant. Artificial beings struggling to find their place in a natural world. Creatures born from humanity's ambition to improve upon nature's design, but ultimately valued for their humility rather than their power. This interpretation transforms every Ditto into a small tragedy and triumph simultaneously. Each one represents a failed experiment, a creature that fell short of its creator's grand ambitions. Yet they've found their own path to significance, becoming invaluable partners to Pokémon breeders and researchers precisely because of their flexibility and adaptability. Their perceived failure to match Mew's legendary status becomes irrelevant in the face of their own unique contributions to the Pokémon ecosystem. As we contemplate the possibility that even failed experiments can find meaning and purpose, our attention turns to another theory that explores the idea of mistakes in Pokémon design, but from a different perspective entirely. This theory suggests that sometimes what appears to be a mistake in nature might actually be a mistake in human understanding or record-keeping, an error that has become so embedded in our knowledge that we've forgotten the original truth. The theory centers around two evolutionary lines that have puzzled Pokémon researchers for decades: the progression from Caterpie to Metapod to Butterfree, and the parallel evolution from Venonat to Venomoth. At first glance, these seem like straightforward examples of insect Pokémon following natural metamorphosis patterns similar to those we observe in real-world butterflies and moths. Yet when we examine the physical characteristics and design elements that connect these evolutionary stages, inconsistencies emerge that suggest something more complex might be at work. The most striking anomaly lies in the visual connections between the Pokémon involved. Caterpie, a small green caterpillar Pokémon, evolves into Metapod, a chrysalis-like creature that maintains similar coloration and basic features. From there, we would expect the final evolution to retain some visual elements that tie it back to its earlier forms. Yet Butterfree presents a dramatic departure from its predecessors. sporting purple body coloration, red compound eyes, and distinctive antennae that seem to have no precedent in either Caterpie or Metapod. Meanwhile, the Venonat evolutionary line presents the opposite pattern. Venonat, described as a bug Pokémon with purple fur, red compound eyes, and prominent antennae, shares virtually no visual characteristics with its evolution, Venomoth. The moth Pokémon displays colors and features that seem completely disconnected from its pre-evolution, creating an evolutionary jump that feels jarring and inconsistent. The theory proposes that these visual inconsistencies result from a mistake in the original documentation or development of these Pokémon, suggesting that the evolutionary connections were accidentally switched at some point. According to this hypothesis, Venonat was originally intended to evolve into Butterfree, while Caterpie and Metapod were meant to culminate in Venomoth. This switch would create evolutionary lines that make much more visual and thematic sense. Under this corrected arrangement, Venonat's purple coloration, red eyes, and fuzzy antennae would flow naturally into Butterfree's similar features, creating a logical progression from a small, grounded bug Pokémon to a beautiful flying butterfly. The connection becomes even more apparent when we consider that both Venonat and Butterfree possess compound eyes and similar body proportions, suggesting a natural evolutionary relationship that the current official classification obscures. Similarly, pairing Caterpie and Metapod with Venomoth creates a more cohesive design narrative. Venomoth's more subdued coloration and sleeker profile would represent a more dramatic but logical transformation from the simple caterpillar and chrysalis forms, following the pattern of radical metamorphosis that characterizes real moth and butterfly development. The behavioral evidence adds another layer to this theory. Venonat is described as being attracted to light, a characteristic that strongly aligns with moth behavior rather than butterfly behavior. Moths are famously drawn to artificial lights and bright sources of illumination, while butterflies typically prefer natural sunlight and are less likely to exhibit the kind of light-seeking behavior attributed to Venonat. If Venonat were originally intended to evolve into a moth Pokémon rather than a butterfly, its light-seeking behavior would make perfect sense. The type effectiveness and battle characteristics of these Pokémon also support the switch theory. Venonat and Butterfree both learn similar psychic-type moves and demonstrate comparable stat distributions, suggesting similar battling roles and capabilities. Their movesets overlap in ways that suggest a natural evolutionary progression, with Butterfree's abilities representing enhanced versions of techniques that Venonat learns at lower levels. The geographical distribution patterns provide additional circumstantial evidence. In many games, Venonat and Butterfree appear in similar habitats and are often found in the same general areas, while Venomoth tends to appear in different locations entirely. This distribution pattern would make more sense if Venonat and Butterfree were evolutionarily connected, sharing habitat preferences due to their biological relationship. Yet as compelling as this theory might initially appear, several factors suggest that the current evolutionary arrangements might be intentional rather than accidental. The timing of Venonat's nocturnal activity patterns, while consistent with moth behavior, could also represent the pre-evolutionary stage of a butterfly Pokémon that will eventually develop different activity preferences. Many real-world insects undergo significant behavioral changes during metamorphosis, shifting not only their physical form but also their preferred habitats and daily rhythms. The visual disconnections between evolutionary stages might reflect the dramatic nature of metamorphosis itself, rather than design errors. Real-world insect metamorphosis often involves radical transformations that completely reshape not only the creature's body, but also its coloration, sensory organs, and basic life strategies. The dramatic visual shifts we observe in Pokémon evolution could be intentionally designed to mirror this natural process of complete transformation. The design philosophy of early Pokémon games also provides context that argues against the switch theory. The original developers were working within significant technical and artistic constraints, creating dozens of creatures with limited resources and tight deadlines. Visual similarities between Pokémon might result from these practical limitations rather than intentional evolutionary connections. Artists working on multiple creature designs might naturally reuse certain visual elements like color schemes and body proportions, simply for efficiency and consistency. Furthermore, the behavioral characteristics that seem to support the switch theory could have alternative explanations. Venonat's attraction to light might represent a juvenile behavior that changes upon evolution, similar to how many real-world insects exhibit different behaviors at different life stages. The nocturnal, light-seeking venonat could naturally develop into the diurnal venomoth through the same metamorphic process that transforms its physical structure. The competitive and statistical similarities between venonat and butterfree might reflect convergent evolution or similar ecological roles rather than direct evolutionary connection. Pokémon that fill similar niches in their ecosystems might naturally develop comparable abilities and characteristics, even if they belong to different evolutionary lines. The fact that two bug-type Pokémon share certain moves and stat distributions could simply indicate that they occupy similar positions in the competitive ecosystem. As we drift deeper into contemplation of these theories about mistakes and failed experiments, we begin to see how they reflect broader themes about perfection and imperfection in both natural and artificial systems. Whether we're considering Ditto as a failed clone that found its own purpose, or examining the possibility of switched evolutionary lines, these theories invite us to question our assumptions about how things should be versus how they actually are. The beauty of these theories lies not in their ultimate truth or falsehood, but in how they encourage us to look more carefully at the world around us, to notice patterns and inconsistencies that might otherwise escape our attention. They remind us that even in carefully designed fictional worlds, there's room for mystery, ambiguity, and multiple interpretations of the same evidence. In the gentle space between waking and sleeping, these questions about mistakes and intentions fade into something more universal. The recognition that imperfection and uncertainty are not flaws to be corrected, but essential elements of any world rich enough to capture our imagination. Whether Ditto succeeded or failed in its intended purpose becomes less important than the joy and utility it brings to trainers who appreciate its unique gifts. Whether evolutionary lines follow their intended patterns becomes secondary to our delight in discovering unexpected connections and possibilities. As these thoughts settle into the quiet corners of our minds, we find ourselves ready to explore even deeper mysteries, theories that touch on the most fundamental questions of identity, relationship, and the bonds that connect all living creatures across the boundaries of species and understanding. As we drift from questions of creation and mistake into the deeper waters of connection and loss, we encounter theories that explore the bonds that tie Pokémon together across species lines and the ways in which grief shapes both creatures and trainers. These theories speak to some of the most fundamental aspects of the Pokémon world, the relationships that transcend simple biological classification, and the emotional truths that underlie even the most fantastical elements of these beloved stories. The first theory we encounter draws us into one of the most poignant stories in Pokémon lore, the tale of Cubone and its eternal mourning for a lost parent. Cubone stands alone among Pokémon as a creature defined entirely by grief, wearing the skull of its deceased mother as both protection and memorial. The official lore tells us that every Cubone is born into tragedy, that somewhere in the cycle of life and death that governs the Pokémon world, Marowak mothers sacrifice themselves to protect their young, leaving behind only their skulls as inheritance and armor. Yet some fans have proposed a different origin for these grieving ground-type Pokémon, one that connects Cubone's tragedy to a species known for devotion to family and fierce protection of offspring. The theory suggests that Cubone might not be a separate species at all, but rather the transformed result of a baby Kangaskhan separated from its mother through death or disaster. The connection begins with careful observation of the environments where these Pokémon appear. Across multiple games and regions, Cubone and Kangaskhan consistently inhabit the same locations, from the rock tunnel in Kanto to Glittering Cave in Kalos. This shared habitat preference extends beyond simple coincidence, creating a pattern that suggests some deeper relationship between the two species. In the Alolan games, Cubone can even call upon Kangaskhan for assistance during battles, summoning the maternal Pokémon to help defend it against threats. as if some ancient bond compels Kangaskhan to protect the lonely ground type. The physical evidence for this connection lies hidden beneath Cubone's most distinctive feature. The skull that defines Cubone's appearance obscures the creature's true face, but official artwork occasionally provides glimpses of what lies underneath. These rare depictions reveal features that bear a striking resemblance to the baby Kangaskhan that perpetually resides in its mother's pouch. The body proportions, the basic facial structure, even the general posture, all suggest similarities that could indicate a shared origin. Baby Kangaskhan presents one of the most intriguing mysteries in Pokémon biology. Despite being clearly visible and apparently viable, baby Kangaskhan cannot be encountered separately from their mothers in the wild. They exist only as part of the mother-child unit that defines the Kangaskhan species, never venturing out independently or developing into separate individuals that players can catch or train. This unusual reproductive arrangement raises questions about what happens to baby Kangaskhan when their mothers die. The theory proposes a tragic answer to this question. When a Kangaskhan mother dies, particularly if she perishes protecting her young from predators or environmental dangers, the baby faces a crisis that goes beyond simple orphaning, cut off from the protective pouch that has defined its entire existence. Forced to survive independently in a world it has never navigated alone. The baby Kangaskhan undergoes a transformation driven by trauma and necessity. The skull of the dead mother becomes both weapon and armor, a desperate adaptation that allows the orphaned baby to survive in hostile environments. But the transformation goes deeper than simple tool use. The grief and trauma of losing the parent who provided not just protection, but identity itself, triggers a fundamental change in the creature's biology. Its typing shifts from normal to ground, reflecting its new earthbound existence and its connection to the gravesite of its mother. Its species classification changes as well, as if the trauma has created something entirely new from the raw material of devastating loss. This interpretation adds profound emotional depth to Cubone's perpetual sorrow. The creature mourns not just for a lost parent, but for its own lost identity, grieving the death of both its mother and its original self. The skull becomes a prison as much as protection, a constant reminder of what was lost, and a barrier that prevents the Pokémon from ever fully integrating into normal social relationships with other creatures. The theory finds support in Kangaskhan's maternal behavior and protective instincts. These Pokémon are described as extraordinarily devoted parents, willing to face any danger to protect their young. A Kangaskhan mother confronted with a threat that she cannot overcome might well sacrifice her own life in a final desperate attempt to save her baby, leaving behind only her skull as the child's inheritance. The baby, traumatized by witnessing this ultimate sacrifice and finding itself alone for the first time, might naturally gravitate toward the skull as the last tangible connection to its lost parent. Kangaskhan's appearance in locations where Cubone are found could represent the species' collective response to these tragedies. Adult Kangaskhan, driven by powerful maternal instincts, might be drawn to areas where orphaned young struggle to survive, offering what protection and assistance they can to creatures that remind them of their own vulnerable offspring. Their willingness to answer Cubone's SOS calls during battles reflects this same protective urge, an instinctive response to distress calls from creatures they recognize as fellow survivors of family tragedy. The evolutionary path that transforms Cubone into Marowak adds another layer to this interpretation. As Cubone grows stronger and more confident, learning to survive independently and finding its own identity separate from its grief, it evolves into Marowak. The skull that once represented trauma and loss becomes a symbol of resilience and adaptation. Marowak wielding a bone club suggests a creature that has learned not just to survive its tragedy, but to transform it into strength, using the very symbol of its loss as a weapon to protect others from similar fates. Yet this beautiful theory encounters significant obstacles when confronted with the official Pokémon lore and the evidence presented in the games themselves. The most fundamental challenge comes from our direct encounters with Cubone's actual mother in the original games. Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town presents us with the ghost of a Marowak, explicitly identified as the mother of a Cubone that lives within the tower. This spectral Marowak is not a Kangaskhan but clearly a member of Cubone's own species, suggesting that the traditional understanding of Cubone reproduction and family structure is correct. The remake games make this connection even more explicit, showing touching cutscenes where a young Cubone says farewell to its Marowak mother's spirit. Pokémon Origins, the anime adaptation that stays closer to game canon than the main series, depicts Team Rocket killing a Marowak that was protecting its Cubone child, establishing beyond question that Cubone and Marowak form natural family units independent of any connection to Kangaskhan. Perhaps most problematically for the theory, newly hatched Cubone already wear skulls when they emerge from their eggs, just as baby Kangaskhan are born already residing in their mother's pouches. This suggests that the skull is not acquired through trauma, but represents a natural part of Cubone biology, as innate and essential as any other physical characteristic. If Cubone were transformed baby Kangaskhan, we would expect to see at least some individuals that lacked skulls, creatures caught in the moment of transition between their original and transformed states. The shared habitats between Cubone and Kangaskhan, while suggestive of connection, might actually reflect Kangaskhan's protective instincts rather than biological relationship. These maternal Pokémon, hearing the cries of orphaned Cubone, might naturally migrate to areas where they can offer assistance and comfort to the grieving young. Their presence becomes an act of compassion rather than evidence of kinship. Adult Kangaskhan extending their protective care to vulnerable creatures who remind them of their own offspring. This alternative explanation actually enhances rather than diminishes the emotional resonance of the theory. It suggests a Pokémon world where maternal instincts transcend species boundaries, where the fundamental drive to protect and nurture young creates connections that exist independent of genetic relationship. Kangaskhan's willingness to help Cubone represents not shared origin, but shared values. A community of creatures united by their understanding of family bonds and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. As we drift from questions of family connection toward considerations of loss and growth in different contexts, we encounter another theory that explores how bonds between trainer and Pokémon can be tested by the harsh realities of competition and adventure. This theory focuses on Blue, the rival character from the original Pokémon games, and suggests that his journey as a trainer was marked by a tragedy that he struggled to process and overcome. Blue begins his Pokémon journey with the same enthusiasm and optimism that characterizes most young trainers, eager to catch Pokémon and prove his skills in battle. Throughout the early stages of his adventure, he demonstrates a consistent pattern of team building, adding new Pokémon to his roster and maintaining them as permanent members of his traveling party. Each Pokémon he catches finds a lasting place on his team, suggesting a trainer who forms genuine attachments to his Pokémon partners and values long-term relationships over temporary convenience. The exception to this pattern centers around a Rattata that Blue catches early in his journey. This small, normal-type Pokémon appears on his team during the encounter at Cerulean City, having evolved from the Rattata he presumably caught in the nearby routes. Like his other Pokémon, Raticate seems destined for a permanent place in Blue's party, another partner in his quest to become Pokémon champion. The bond between Blue and his Raticate appears strong, with the evolved rat Pokémon holding its own in battles and contributing meaningfully to Blue's success. Then something changes. After the battle aboard the SS Anne, Raticate disappears from Blue's team entirely, never to return despite the fact that he has open spaces in his party during subsequent encounters. This departure marks the only time in Blue's journey where he permanently removes a Pokémon from his team without replacing it with an evolution or obviously superior alternative. The absence becomes even more notable when we consider that Raticate was performing well in battle and had proven its worth as a team member. The next time we encounter Blue after the SS Anne incident, he appears in Pokémon Tower, the solemn resting place where the spirits of deceased Pokémon are honored and laid to rest. His presence in this location of mourning and remembrance takes on ominous significance when viewed in light of his missing Raticate. Blue's dialogue during this encounter includes assumptions about why the player character might be visiting the tower, suggesting that someone's Pokémon has died and needs to be commemorated. The theory proposes that Blue's Raticate died as a result of injuries sustained during the battle aboard the SS, Anne, possibly from the player character's attacks or from complications that developed afterward. This would explain both the Pokemon's disappearance from Blue's team and his subsequent appearance in Pokémon Tower. Rather than visiting the tower to catch ghost-type Pokémon or satisfy curiosity, Blue has come to mourn his fallen partner and to process the grief of losing a Pokémon he had grown to care about. Blue's behavior during the Pokémon Tower encounter supports this interpretation. His dialogue carries an unusual emotional undertone, lacking the typical boastful confidence that characterizes most of his interactions with the player. He seems more subdued, more thoughtful, as if wrestling with feelings and experiences that have challenged his previous understanding of what it means to be a Pokémon trainer. His assumption that the player is also in the tower to mourn suggests that loss and grief are very much on his mind. The theory gains additional weight when we consider the broader context of Blue's character development. Throughout the games, he maintains a somewhat callous exterior, often dismissing concerns about Pokémon welfare and focusing primarily on strength and victory. This attitude could represent a defense mechanism developed in response to the trauma of losing Raticate, a way of protecting himself from forming attachments that might lead to similar pain in the future. Blue's treatment of his remaining Pokémon supports this interpretation. While he continues to train and battle with his team, his interactions with them become more distant and utilitarian. He stops referring to his Pokémon by name or expressing personal attachment, instead focusing on their battle performance and strategic value. This emotional distancing could reflect his attempt to avoid experiencing the grief he felt when Raticate died. The timing of Raticate's disappearance also aligns with this theory in significant ways. The SS Anne battle represents one of the more intense early game encounters, a battle that could realistically push Pokémon to their limits and potentially result in serious injury. If Blue's Raticate was already weakened from previous battles, or if the player's Pokémon delivered particularly powerful attacks, the cumulative damage could have proven fatal, despite the game mechanics that typically prevent Pokémon death during normal gameplay. Yet this theory, like others we've explored, faces challenges when confronted with alternative explanations and game mechanics. The most straightforward interpretation of Raticate's disappearance is that Blue simply decided to replace it with a stronger Pokémon, following the natural progression of most trainers who upgrade their teams as they encounter more powerful species. Raticate, while capable, is not considered a particularly strong Pokémon in competitive terms, and Blue's omission of it from later battles could reflect strategic optimization rather than mourning. The game mechanics themselves argue against Pokémon death during normal battles. Throughout the series, Pokémon are described as fainting rather than dying when defeated in battle, with Pokémon centers providing complete healing for any injuries sustained during competition. The systems that govern Pokémon battles are explicitly designed to prevent permanent harm, suggesting that Blue's Raticate could not have died from battle injuries under normal circumstances. Blue's presence in Pokémon Tower might have purely practical motivations rather than emotional ones. The tower contains several rare ghost-type Pokémon that would be valuable additions to any trainer's team, providing compelling reasons for ambitious trainers like Blue to explore the location. His comments about dead Pokémon could reflect his awareness of the tower's purpose and function rather than personal experience with loss. The emotional distance that Blue displays toward his Pokémon throughout the games might reflect his personality and training philosophy rather than trauma response. Some trainers naturally maintain more professional relationships with their Pokémon, viewing them as partners in competition rather than pets or companions. Blue's focus on strength and victory could represent his genuine approach to Pokémon training, rather than a defense mechanism developed after experiencing loss. Yellow version presents additional complications for this theory. In this variation of the original games, Blue's Rattata never evolves into Raticate, remaining in its basic form throughout their encounters. Yet it still disappears from his team after the SS Anne, suggesting that the departure might not be related to the evolutionary status that makes Raticate more personally significant than its pre-evolution. Despite these alternative explanations, the theory retains emotional power because it addresses universal themes of loss, growth, and the ways we learn to cope with tragedy. Whether or not Blue actually lost his Raticate to battle injuries, The theory speaks to the reality that Pokémon training, like any adventure involving risk and competition, inevitably involves experiences of loss and disappointment. Young trainers must learn to process these setbacks and find ways to continue pursuing their goals despite the pain of failure or separation. The theory also reflects our understanding of how trauma can shape personality and behavior in subtle but lasting ways. Blue's evolution from an enthusiastic young trainer to a more distant and competitive rival could represent natural maturation, but it could also reflect the defensive strategies that people develop when they've experienced significant loss. His eventual growth into the capable gym leader he becomes in later generations suggests that he learned to process whatever challenges he faced during his initial journey. As we contemplate these theories of connection and loss, we begin to see how they function as more than explanations for specific game elements or character behaviors. They provide frameworks for understanding the emotional truths that underlie the Pokémon experience. The ways in which relationships between trainers and Pokémon mirror the bonds we form in our own lives, and the challenges we face when those bonds are tested by circumstance and time. The beauty of these theories lies not in their factual accuracy, but in their emotional authenticity. They recognize that meaningful relationships inevitably involve vulnerability and the risk of loss, but they also celebrate the resilience that allows both Pokémon and people to continue forming new bonds despite the pain that previous losses might have caused. Whether Cubone represents orphaned baby Kangaskhan or Blue mourns a fallen, Raticate becomes less important than the universal truths these stories reveal about love, loss, and the courage required to keep caring for others, even when we know that caring makes us vulnerable to grief. In the gentle quiet that follows these contemplations, we find ourselves ready to explore even deeper questions about the nature of reality and consciousness in the Pokémon world, theories that ask not just what happened, but whether what we think happened is actually real at all. As our journey through Pokémon theories carries us into even deeper waters of contemplation, we encounter questions that challenge the very nature of reality within the world we've come to know and love. These theories ask us to consider whether the adventures we've witnessed and the growth we've celebrated might exist in a different realm entirely, one where the normal rules of time and aging bend to accommodate dreams that feel more real than waking life itself. The first theory we explore emerged from a simple observation that has puzzled fans for decades: Ash Ketchum's eternal youth. Throughout his 25-year journey as the protagonist of the Pokémon anime, Ash traveled across multiple regions, formed countless friendships, witnessed the evolution of dozens of Pokémon, and eventually achieved his dream of becoming a Pokémon master. Yet through all these adventures and accomplishments, he remained perpetually 10 years old, unchanged by the passage of time that should have transformed him from child to adult. This apparent immunity to aging has inspired various explanations, but none more haunting than the theory that suggests Ash's adventures exist only in his unconscious mind, dreams or hallucinations born from a tragic accident that occurred on the very first day of his Pokémon journey. The theory asks us to reconsider everything we've witnessed through a darker lens, one that transforms triumph into tragedy and adventure into desperate escape from an unbearable reality. The foundation of this theory rests on the events of that first fateful morning when Ash began his journey as a Pokémon trainer. Running late to Professor Oak's laboratory, Ash found himself with no choice but to accept Pikachu as his starter Pokémon, beginning a partnership that would define both their destinies. Yet, their relationship started poorly, with Pikachu refusing to obey Ash's commands and even actively resisting his attempts at training and bonding. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Team Rocket's interference led to a confrontation with a flock of wild Spearow. These aggressive bird Pokémon, enraged by Pikachu's electric attacks, pursued Ash and his new partner with murderous intent. The chase culminated in a desperate moment when Ash, exhausted and overwhelmed, crashed Misty's borrowed bicycle while trying to escape the attacking flock. The impact sent him tumbling through the air, his body striking the ground hard enough to leave him stunned and vulnerable. What happened next has become the subject of intense speculation among those who subscribe to this theory. As the Spearow closed in for their final attack, Pikachu unleashed an electric discharge of unprecedented power, a thunderbolt so massive that it illuminated the entire sky and could be seen for miles around. The official narrative tells us that this display of power frightened the Spearow into retreat, saving both Ash and Pikachu and marking the beginning of their unbreakable bond. The theory proposes a far darker alternative. Instead of surviving this overwhelming electrical discharge, Ash suffered massive trauma that left his body broken and his mind retreating into the safety of unconsciousness. The bicycle crash, combined with the proximity to Pikachu's most powerful attack, inflicted injuries so severe that the young trainer's brain, unable to process the reality of his situation, constructed an elaborate fantasy world where he could continue his Pokémon journey without the limitations imposed by his damaged body. In this interpretation, every subsequent adventure exists only in Ash's comatose mind, elaborate dreams that allow him to experience the trainer's life he had always imagined, while his physical form lies motionless in a hospital bed. The theory explains his eternal youth through the logic of dreams, where time moves differently and the dreamer remains frozen at the age when the dream began. Ash cannot age because his unconscious mind preserves him as the 10-year-old boy who set out on his first day of adventure before tragedy transformed possibility into mere fantasy. The evidence cited for this theory focuses on the increasingly surreal nature of Ash's adventures as the series progresses. His ability to survive attacks that should prove fatal, from direct hits by powerful Pokémon moves to falls from impossible heights, makes sense only if these experiences exist purely in the realm of imagination. Real bodies break and real injuries leave lasting consequences. But dream bodies can endure any punishment and emerge unmarked by trauma. The theory also points to the circular nature of many of Ash's experiences, the way patterns repeat across different regions and storylines, as if his unconscious mind is recycling familiar themes rather than creating truly new experiences. His relationships follow similar arcs, his battles echo previous encounters, and his growth as a trainer seems to reset whenever he enters a new region, as if his dreaming mind can only maintain so much complexity before reverting to familiar patterns. Perhaps most poignantly, the theory suggests that Ash's eventual achievement of becoming Pokémon Master represents not triumph, but tragedy, the moment when his unconscious mind finally exhausts its ability to maintain the elaborate fantasy that has sustained him for so long. His victory becomes a farewell, the natural conclusion of a dream that has finally run its course, leaving only the harsh reality of a hospital room and a body that never recovered from that first terrible day. Yet as we drift deeper into contemplation of this dark possibility, we encounter alternative explanations that offer hope and healing rather than despair. The eternal youth that characterizes not just Ash but the entire Pokémon animated universe might reflect not trauma but blessing, the intervention of forces far more benevolent than the cruel hand of fate that the coma theory suggests. This gentler interpretation centers around Ho-Oh, the legendary Pokémon that Ash glimpsed on his very first day as a trainer. According to Pokédex entries and ancient legends, Ho-Oh possesses the power to grant eternal happiness to those pure of heart who encounter it. The rainbow Pokémon's appearance in the sky above Ash and Pikachu, occurring at the exact moment when their bond began to form, takes on profound significance when viewed through this lens. The theory proposes that Ho-Oh, witnessing the joy and wonder that filled Ash's heart as he began his Pokémon journey, granted him the ultimate gift, the ability to remain forever in that state of childhood wonder and endless possibility. Rather than suffering from an inability to age, Ash received a blessing that preserved him in the perfect moment of beginning, when every day held new adventures and every encounter promised new friendships. This interpretation transforms Ash's eternal youth from curse into celebration. He remains 10 years old not because his growth has been stunted, but because 10 represents the ideal age of discovery, old enough to embark on adventures independently, yet young enough to maintain the sense of wonder that makes those adventures meaningful. Ho-Oh's gift preserves not just Ash's physical age, but his emotional and spiritual capacity for joy, ensuring that he approaches each new experience with the same enthusiasm and openness that characterized his very first day as a trainer. The cyclical nature of Ash's adventures, rather than representing the limited imagination of a dreaming mind, reflects the eternal renewal that comes with maintaining childlike wonder. Each new region becomes truly new because Ash encounters it with fresh eyes, unencumbered by the cynicism and jadedness that often accompany adult perspectives. His ability to form instant friendships and see the best in every Pokémon and person he meets stems from the preservation of childhood's natural optimism and trust. Under this interpretation, the fantastic elements of Ash's adventures, his ability to survive impossible situations and witness miraculous events, represent not dream logic, but the reality of a world where legendary Pokémon take active interest in maintaining joy and wonder. Ho-Oh's blessing extends beyond simple age preservation to encompass protection from the harsh realities that might otherwise diminish Ash's capacity for happiness and growth. The theory gains support from Ho-Oh's established role in the Pokémon world as a force of renewal and resurrection. This legendary Pokémon has demonstrated the power to restore life to the dead, transforming tragedy into triumph through acts of compassion and divine intervention. Granting eternal happiness to a pure-hearted child falls well within the scope of abilities that Ho-Oh has already demonstrated, making this explanation both plausible and consistent with established lore. The emotional resonance of Ho-Oh's blessing theory speaks to universal human desires for preservation and protection of innocence. Every adult carries within them the memory of childhood wonder, the time when the world seemed infinite with possibility, and every day held the promise of new discoveries. Ash's eternal youth represents not just his own preservation, but our collective wish to maintain connection with that sense of endless potential. Yet both theories, whether dark or light, ultimately serve similar functions in addressing our complex relationship with the passage of time and the inevitability of change. They acknowledge that there is something precious about childhood that we are reluctant to lose, something valuable in the perspective that sees every Pokémon as a potential friend and every new route as an adventure waiting to unfold. The coma theory, despite its darkness, offers its own form of comfort by suggesting that even in the face of overwhelming trauma, the human mind possesses the capacity to create elaborate worlds of meaning and beauty. If Ash's adventures exist only in dreams, they remain no less meaningful for being imagined. The friendships he forms, the lessons he learns, and the growth he experiences retain their emotional truth regardless of their physical reality. The Ho-Oh blessing theory provides a more optimistic framework, but ultimately addresses the same human concerns about the relationship between growth and loss. It suggests that true maturity doesn't require abandoning wonder, that it's possible to gain wisdom and experience without losing the fundamental joy that makes life worth living. Ash's preservation becomes a model for how we might approach our own journeys through life, maintaining openness to new experiences while building on the foundation of joy and curiosity that childhood provides. Both theories reflect our ambivalence about the traditional narrative of growing up, the expectation that maturation necessarily involves trading wonder for wisdom, joy for responsibility, and dreams for practical concerns. They propose alternative models where these trade-offs are not inevitable, where it's possible to maintain the best aspects of childhood while still growing and developing as individuals. The eternal nature of Ash's adventures, whether sustained by unconscious imagination or legendary blessing, speaks to our desire for stories that don't end, for characters who don't outgrow their capacity to surprise and delight us. In a world where serialized entertainment often demands ever-escalating stakes and increasingly complex storylines, Ash's consistency represents a different kind of narrative pleasure, one based on familiarity and the comfort of knowing that some things remain constant even as everything else changes. The theories also address the unique relationship between audience and character in long-running animated series. Viewers who began watching Ash's adventures as children often find themselves adults, while he remains forever 10, creating a strange temporal relationship where the audience ages past their protagonist. The theories provide frameworks for understanding this relationship, whether as shared dream space where age becomes irrelevant, or as blessed narrative where wonder transcends temporal limitations. As we contemplate these competing explanations for Ash's eternal youth, we begin to see how they function as more than mere speculation about fictional characters. They represent different approaches to understanding time, growth, and the relationship between imagination and reality in our own lives. Whether we prefer the darkness of the coma theory or the light of Ho-Oh's blessing, reveals something about our own attitudes toward change, loss, and the possibility of maintaining joy in the face of life's inevitable challenges. The coma theory appeals to those who have experienced the ways in which trauma can reshape reality, creating internal worlds that feel more real and meaningful than the external circumstances that inspired their creation. It acknowledges the power of imagination to provide refuge and healing, even when that imagination stems from desperate necessity rather than simple creativity. The Ho-Oh blessing theory speaks to those who believe in the possibility of grace, in forces beyond human understanding that work to preserve and protect what is most precious in human experience. It suggests that wonder and joy are not merely childhood phases to be outgrown, but essential aspects of human nature that deserve protection and cultivation throughout life. Both theories ultimately celebrate the value of Ash's perspective and the importance of the adventures he experiences, regardless of their ontological status. They recognize that meaning doesn't depend on physical reality, that the lessons learned and friendships formed in dreams or through divine blessing carry the same weight as those forged in purely material circumstances. In the quiet space between sleeping and waking, where the boundary between dream and reality grows thin, these theories take on a different kind of significance. They become invitations to consider our own relationship with wonder, our own capacity to maintain joy and openness in the face of time's passage. They ask us to examine whether growing older necessarily means growing away from the sources of delight and discovery that make life meaningful. As these gentle questions settle into our minds like evening mist, we find ourselves ready to explore other mysteries hidden within the Pokémon world. Other theories that challenge our assumptions about the nature of conflict and recovery in the regions we've come to know and love. The boundaries between dream and waking blur, and we drift toward new understanding carried on the wings of legendary Pokémon who watch over sleeping trainers and ensure their rest is filled with peaceful dreams of endless adventure. As our exploration of Pokémon theories carries us deeper into contemplation, we encounter whispers of darker histories that may lie hidden beneath the cheerful surface of the Pokémon world. These theories ask us to consider whether the regions we've come to love as places of adventure and friendship might carry scars from conflicts we've never directly witnessed, shadows of wars that shaped the world long before young trainers began their journeys of discovery and growth. The theory emerges from careful observation of details that seem insignificant individually, but create a pattern when viewed together, subtle signs that suggest the Kanto region might be a society still recovering from some great trauma. The evidence begins with simple demographic observations that take on ominous significance when examined closely. Throughout Kanto, adult male figures are remarkably scarce, their absence creating a population structure that defies normal social patterns. Consider the communities that young trainers encounter during their journeys through this region. Pallet Town, the starting point for so many adventures, contains only Professor Oak as a significant adult male authority figure. Ash's father is never mentioned, existing only as an absence that the narrative never attempts to explain. Blue's father similarly remains invisible, as if entire generations of men have simply vanished from the domestic landscape without explanation or acknowledgement. This pattern extends beyond the boundaries of small towns into the larger cities and institutions that define Cantonian society. The gym leaders who serve as both challengers and mentors for young trainers include only one adult male, Luten, Surge of Vermilion City, whose presence becomes more significant when we consider his unique background and the cryptic comments that have sparked decades of speculation among fans. Lieutenant Surge stands apart from other gym leaders, not just in his foreignness, but in his military bearing and the casual way he references experiences that seem far removed from the peaceful world of Pokémon training. His most telling comment comes during battles with young challengers, when he mentions that electric Pokémon saved him during the war, a statement delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone referencing shared historical knowledge rather than revealing shocking information. The implications of this casual reference to warfare become more disturbing when we consider what Lieutenant Surge means by saved him during the war. He's not speaking metaphorically about Pokémon battles or friendly competitions. His phrasing suggests genuine conflict, life or death situations where electric Pokémon served as weapons or tools of survival in actual combat. The idea that Pokémon, creatures we've come to associate with friendship and peaceful competition, might have been used as instruments of war, introduces a darkness that challenges our understanding of the Pokémon world's fundamental nature. Lieutenant Surge's military background becomes even more intriguing when we examine the additional information revealed in later games. Fire Red and Leaf Green identify him explicitly as the Lightning American, establishing his foreign origins and suggesting that whatever conflict he survived occurred outside of Kanto itself. The games describe him as a former pilot who used electricity generated by Pokémon to power his aircraft, creating an image of Pokémon-human military cooperation that transforms these beloved creatures into living power sources for war machines. This revelation raises profound questions about the nature of the conflict. Surge survived, and the role that Pokémon played in whatever war he's referencing. If Pokémon electricity could power military aircraft, what other applications might have been developed during wartime? The peaceful partnership between humans and Pokémon that defines the current era might represent a deliberate rejection of the militaristic applications that once turned these creatures into weapons of destruction. The demographic evidence supporting a great war theory extends beyond simple absence of adult males to encompass the social structures that have emerged to fill the resulting void. Throughout Kanto, we encounter numerous organized groups that seem to exist outside normal social hierarchies. Team Rocket represents the most obvious example, but they're merely the largest and most visible of many gangs and criminal organizations that have claimed territory and influence in the region. These groups often consist primarily of young adults and teenagers, individuals who would have grown up in the aftermath of whatever conflict depleted the adult male population. Their organization into pseudo-military structures, complete with uniforms, hierarchies, and territorial control, could represent attempts to recreate the social order and masculine authority figures that disappeared during the war. Team Rocket's emphasis on capturing and exploiting Pokémon might even echo wartime attitudes that viewed these creatures primarily as resources to be utilized rather than partners to be cherished. The prevalence of these organizations throughout Kanto suggests a society struggling to maintain order and authority in the absence of traditional social structures. Young people, lacking proper adult guidance and role models, have formed their own alternative communities based on power, territory, and the exploitation of resources, including Pokémon. The fact that these groups focus so heavily on Pokémon theft and black market trading could reflect economic disruption caused by wartime destruction and the subsequent need to rebuild damaged infrastructure and communities. Professor Oak's prominence in Pallet Town takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. Rather than simply being a respected researcher, he might represent one of the few surviving authority figures from the pre-war era, a scholar whose age and wisdom make him invaluable to communities struggling to preserve knowledge and culture in the aftermath of devastation. His role in providing young trainers with their first Pokémon could represent more than academic interest, serving as part of a broader social program designed to rebuild healthy relationships between humans and Pokémon after a period when these bonds were corrupted by military necessity. The Pokémon League itself might represent a deliberate effort to channel the competitive and potentially aggressive instincts of young people into peaceful pursuits that strengthen rather than exploit human Pokémon bonds. By creating a structured system of challenges and achievements focused on partnership rather than domination, the League provides positive outlets for the energy and ambition that might otherwise be recruited by criminal organizations or directed toward destructive ends. The theory gains additional support from the technological landscape of Kanto, which displays the uneven development patterns typical of post-conflict societies. Advanced Pokémon storage and healing technology coexists with remarkably primitive infrastructure in many areas. This technological disparity could reflect the selective destruction of civilian infrastructure during warfare, followed by focused rebuilding efforts that prioritized certain capabilities over others. The emphasis on Pokémon healing technology, in particular, makes sense in a society recovering from conflict where Pokémon injuries might have been commonplace and traditional veterinary resources overwhelmed or destroyed. The Pokémon Center network, with its advanced healing capabilities and universal accessibility, could represent a massive public health initiative designed to address the long-term consequences of Pokémon exploitation and abuse during wartime. The uniformity and standardization of Pokémon centers across different cities and regions also suggests coordinated planning and resource allocation on a scale that would be necessary for post-war reconstruction. The fact that these facilities operate free of charge implies significant public investment in infrastructure designed to restore and maintain healthy human-Pokémon relationships after a period when such bonds were strained or broken by military necessity. Yet as we drift deeper into contemplation of this theory, alternative explanations emerge that challenge the assumption of recent large-scale warfare. The demographic patterns that seem to suggest missing adult males might reflect other social or economic factors that have nothing to do with military conflict. The prevalence of single mothers and absent fathers in the Pokémon world could represent cultural attitudes toward family structure that differ from our own world's norms, rather than evidence of war casualties. Lieutenant Surge's comments about war and his identification as American might not refer to conflict involving Kanto at all, but rather to his experiences in his homeland before emigrating to become a gym leader. The Pokémon world's geography includes regions that clearly correspond to real-world locations and conflicts in Lieutenant Surge's Native America could have shaped his military background without directly affecting the Kanto region, where he now lives and works. The criminal organizations that proliferate throughout Kanto might represent normal social phenomena rather than post-war power vacuum effects. Young adults often form alternative social structures when they feel disconnected from mainstream society, and the prevalence of Pokémon as valuable resources naturally creates opportunities for black market activity and organized crime. Team Rocket's focus on rare and powerful Pokémon could reflect simple economic opportunism rather than cultural attitudes shaped by wartime exploitation. The technological disparities observed throughout Kanto might result from the natural development patterns of a society that prioritizes certain innovations over others based on cultural values and immediate needs. The advanced Pokémon-related technology could reflect this society's deep commitment to human-Pokémon partnerships rather than emergency responses to war-related trauma and injury. The absence of detailed historical records about recent conflicts could indicate that no such conflicts occurred rather than suggesting deliberate concealment or cultural trauma, too painful to discuss openly. The Pokémon world's focus on current adventures and future possibilities, rather than past struggles, might reflect a naturally forward-looking cultural outlook rather than avoidance of recent traumatic history. Professor Oak's prominence might stem from his genuine expertise and contributions to Pokémon research rather than his status as a war survivor. His role in providing starter Pokémon to young trainers could represent long-standing cultural traditions around coming-of-age ceremonies and the initiation of young people into adult responsibilities rather than post-war social reconstruction efforts. The Pokémon League's emphasis on peaceful competition and partnership might reflect the natural evolution of human-Pokémon relationships rather than deliberate rehabilitation from militaristic exploitation. The values of friendship, mutual respect, and collaborative achievement that define league competition could represent core cultural principles that have always guided this society rather than conscious reactions against a darker past. As we contemplate these competing interpretations, we begin to see how theories about hidden warfare in the Pokémon world reflect our own complex relationships with conflict, trauma, and recovery in real-world contexts. The Great War theory appeals to our pattern-seeking minds and our awareness that many societies carry invisible scars from conflicts that shape their development in ways not immediately apparent to outside observers. The theory also speaks to universal concerns about how violence and conflict affect communities, particularly the ways in which warfare can disrupt family structures, create economic instability, and force societies to rebuild their fundamental institutions and values. The demographic patterns and social structures observed in Kanto echo challenges faced by real-world communities recovering from various forms of trauma and disruption. The alternative explanations remind us that apparent evidence of conflict might reflect other social phenomena entirely. That the patterns we interpret as signs of hidden trauma could result from cultural differences, economic factors, or simple coincidence rather than dramatic historical events. The urge to find dark explanations for apparent anomalies might sometimes blind us to more mundane but equally valid alternative interpretations. The relationship between Pokémon and warfare that the theory explores touches on deeper questions about how societies balance the potential for both cooperation and exploitation in relationships with powerful non-human entities. The idea that Pokémon might have been used as weapons forces us to confront the reality that any partnership relationship contains the potential for abuse, that the same bonds that create friendship and mutual benefit can be twisted into domination and exploitation under extreme circumstances. The theory's focus on Lieutenant Surge as a foreign veteran also reflects real-world concerns about how individuals carry the psychological and cultural impacts of conflict across geographical and temporal boundaries. His integration into peaceful Cantonian society as a gym leader could represent successful post-conflict rehabilitation and the possibility of finding new purpose and identity after experiencing trauma and violence. The healing and rebuilding aspects of the theory offer hope alongside darkness, suggesting that societies can recover from even devastating conflicts and create new institutions and values that prevent the repetition of past mistakes. The Pokémon League, the Pokémon Center Network, and the cultural emphasis on partnership rather than exploitation could all represent positive adaptations that emerged from collective commitment to avoiding whatever mistakes led to previous conflict. The demographic recovery, implied by the presence of young trainers throughout Kanto, suggests that whatever disruption occurred, whether from war or other causes, did not permanently damage the society's ability to nurture new generations and provide them with opportunities for growth and achievement. The enthusiasm and optimism displayed by young Pokémon trainers indicates a culture that has maintained its capacity for hope and forward movement despite whatever challenges it has faced. In the gentle space between waking and sleeping, these questions about hidden histories and recovered societies take on a dreamlike quality that transcends their specific application to fictional worlds. They become meditations on resilience, on the human capacity to rebuild and recover from trauma, and on the possibility that even the darkest periods in a society's history can give birth to institutions and values that create lasting positive change. The theories remind us that every peaceful moment exists against a background of challenges overcome and difficulties survived, that the stability and safety we often take for granted might represent the hard-won achievements of previous generations who faced and surmounted threats we can barely imagine. They encourage gratitude for peace, while maintaining awareness that peace requires constant nurturing and protection. As these contemplations settle into our minds like evening shadows, we find ourselves ready to explore other mysteries hidden within familiar landscapes, other theories that challenge our assumptions about the relationship between appearance and reality in the worlds we think we know completely. As we drift from considerations of hidden histories toward mysteries that live in the spaces between what we can see and what we imagine might exist, we encounter theories that speak to one of humanity's most enduring fascinations: the possibility that familiar places harbor secrets just beyond our reach, waiting for the right combination of persistence and ingenuity to reveal their hidden treasures. The most enduring of these theories centers around a simple truck parked in a seemingly insignificant corner of the Pokémon world. A humble vehicle that became the focus of more speculation, experimentation, and desperate hope than perhaps any other single object in gaming history. The truck sits quietly on a dock in Vermilion City's harbor, its presence so mundane that most players would pass it without a second thought. Yet this ordinary-looking vehicle sparked one of the most persistent and beloved legends in Pokémon lore. The truck's significance lies not in its appearance, but in its inaccessibility through normal gameplay. During the natural progression through the original Pokémon games, players board the SS Anne in Vermilion Harbor, explore the luxury liner, obtain the HM for cut, and then watch as the ship departs permanently, taking with it any conventional means of reaching the small dock area where the truck waits in solitude. The timing of this sequence creates a tantalizing glimpse of something that seems important but remains forever beyond reach through ordinary means. This inaccessibility would have made the truck nothing more than a curiosity if not for one crucial detail. The sprite used for this vehicle appears nowhere else in the original games. The developers created a unique graphical asset for this single truck, investing time and resources in designing something that players were never meant to interact with or even approach. This unusual attention to detail for an apparently insignificant background element struck dedicated players as suspicious, as if the developers were hiding something important behind the barrier of the departed ship. The theory that grew around this mysterious truck proposed that it concealed the ultimate secret of the Pokémon world: Mew itself. This legendary Pokémon had captured players' imaginations from the moment they first heard rumors of its existence. But no legitimate method for obtaining Mew existed within the games themselves. Nintendo had acknowledged Mew's presence in the game data, but claimed it was only accessible through special promotional events, creating a gulf between desire and possibility that seemed designed to torture dedicated fans. The truck seemed to offer hope for bridging this gulf. If Mew existed somewhere in the game code, and if the developers had hidden it behind elaborate barriers to discovery, then surely this unique, inaccessible truck must be the key to finding it. The logic felt sound to players desperate for any path to obtaining their beloved legendary Pokémon. And the truck's isolation made it feel appropriately special, a fitting hiding place for something as rare and valuable as Mew. Yet reaching the truck required methods that pushed the boundaries of normal gameplay into territory that felt more like detective work than entertainment. Players discovered that trading for a Pokémon that already knew Cut could bypass the need to obtain the HM from the SS Anne, allowing them to progress through the game without triggering the ship's departure. Alternatively, losing a battle on the ship after obtaining Cut would cause players to black out and return to the Pokémon Center, leaving the ship still docked and accessible for future visits once they had obtained Surf. The most elaborate method involved exploiting connections between the original Game Boy games and Pokémon Stadium 2, using the transfer system to introduce items that could bypass the roadblocks in Saffron City and sequence break the entire game progression. These techniques required knowledge that bordered on programming expertise, demanding the kind of dedication and ingenuity that only true believers in hidden secrets would invest in their quests for discovery. Armed with these methods, countless players made pilgrimages to the lonely truck, approaching it with the reverence typically reserved for sacred sites. They tried everything imaginable to coax Mew from its supposed hiding place, using strength to push the truck aside, examining it from every possible angle, visiting at different times of day, bringing specific Pokémon or items that might serve as keys to unlock its secrets. The community developed elaborate rituals and procedures, each one more desperate than the last, all based on the unshakable conviction that persistence would eventually yield the ultimate reward. The truck never surrendered Mew, of course. No amount of pushing, prodding, or pleading could make it reveal secrets it never contained. Players who finally reached this long-sought destination found nothing but disappointment. The bitter realization that their elaborate theories and tireless efforts had been focused on an empty promise, a phantom secret that existed only in their collective imagination. Yet the story doesn't end with disappointment. When Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green reimagined the original games for a new generation, the developers acknowledged the truck legend with a gesture that was both cruel and kind. The truck remained in its isolated location, still requiring elaborate methods to reach, but now it contained a small reward, a lava cookie, a healing item of modest value accompanied by what felt like a gentle apology for the years of false hope the original truck had inspired. This token acknowledgement transformed the truck from symbol of frustration into monument to community creativity and shared obsession. The developers had heard the legends, understood the passion that drove players to such elaborate lengths, and chosen to honor that dedication with a small but meaningful gesture. The lava cookie became more precious than Mew itself might have been. Not because of its practical value, but because it represented recognition, validation that the community's dreams and efforts had been noticed and appreciated. The psychology behind the truck theory reveals profound truths about how we relate to mystery and possibility in the worlds we love. The truck captured imaginations precisely because it seemed simultaneously important and impossible, special but inaccessible. Its unique sprite suggested significance, while its isolation promised exclusivity, creating the perfect conditions for speculation and hope to flourish. The theory also reflects our deep-seated belief that dedication and cleverness should be rewarded, that secrets exist for those persistent enough to uncover them. The elaborate methods required to reach the truck felt appropriate to players because they matched the perceived value of what might be found there. If Mew was truly the ultimate Pokémon, then surely it would require ultimate effort and ingenuity to obtain, making the complex sequence, breaking and boundary pushing, feel not like cheating but like legitimate puzzle solving. The community aspect of the truck legend adds another layer of meaning to its enduring appeal. Players shared methods, theories, and experiences, creating a collective mythology that transcended individual disappointment. Even when the truck failed to yield its supposed secrets, the shared pursuit created bonds between players and added richness to their understanding of the game world. The theory became more valuable than its object, the journey more meaningful than any possible destination. The truck theory exists as part of a broader category of legends that focus on hidden areas and secret Pokémon scattered throughout the games. Players convince themselves that empty lots in cities concealed underground passages, that suspicious-looking buildings must contain hidden rooms, that every unexplored corner of the game world might harbor undiscovered treasures. These theories shared the truck's essential characteristics: apparent significance, combined with mysterious inaccessibility, creating spaces where imagination could flourish unchecked by disappointing reality. The prevalence of these theories speaks to fundamental aspects of human psychology and our relationship with exploration and discovery. We are pattern-seeking creatures, naturally inclined to assume that apparent anomalies must have significance, that developers wouldn't include unusual elements without purpose. When we encounter something that seems different or special, our instinct is to investigate, to assume meaning rather than coincidence. The gaming medium itself encourages this kind of thinking by creating worlds where every element has been deliberately placed, where nothing exists by accident. Unlike the natural world, where strange formations and unusual configurations often result from random processes, game worlds are entirely artificial, products of conscious design, where every sprite and every location serves some intended function. This knowledge creates reasonable expectations that apparent secrets probably are secrets, that unusual elements probably do have hidden purposes. The disappointment that often follows the investigation of these apparent secrets carries its own psychological significance. The gap between expectation and reality forces players to confront the limitations of their beloved game worlds, to acknowledge that even carefully crafted fictional universes have boundaries beyond which nothing exists. Yet this disappointment often transforms into appreciation for the mystery itself, for the way uncertainty and possibility enhance the experience of exploration, even when they don't lead to concrete discoveries. The truck theory and others like it also reflect our complicated relationship with authority and official information in gaming contexts. Nintendo's insistence that Mew was only available through promotional events created a sense of artificial scarcity that many players found frustrating and unfair. The search for hidden methods to obtain Mew represented not just desire for the Pokémon itself, but rebellion against the idea that access to content should be controlled by corporate decision-making rather than player effort and creativity. This tension between official and unofficial methods of discovery extends beyond individual theories to encompass broader questions about who controls the meaning and content of fictional worlds. When players develop elaborate theories about hidden secrets, they're asserting their own interpretive authority over the games they love, claiming the right to find significance and possibility that might not align with developer intentions. The eventual acknowledgement of the truck legend through the lava cookie demonstrates how these theories can influence official development, creating feedback loops where community creativity shapes future official content. The developer's decision to honor the legend rather than ignore it suggests recognition that player theories and speculation add value to games beyond their original design, that community imagination can become part of a game's true content, even when it contradicts original intentions. The truck theory also illuminates the role of technology and technical limitations in shaping player imagination. The methods required to reach the truck pushed against the boundaries of what the original Game Boy hardware and software were designed to support, creating a sense of transgression and discovery that felt appropriate to the magnitude of the supposed secret. The technical difficulty of accessing the truck made finding it feel like genuine achievement, regardless of what might or might not be found there. Modern gaming, with its internet connectivity and regular updates, has largely eliminated the conditions that allowed theories like the truck legend to flourish. Data mining and online resources quickly reveal the actual contents of game files, while patches and updates can add or remove content dynamically. The sense of fixed, discoverable secrets that might remain hidden for years has largely disappeared, replaced by more transparent but perhaps less magical relationships between developers and communities. Yet the truck theory's enduring popularity suggests that something valuable has been lost in this transition toward transparency. The mystery and uncertainty that once surrounded game secrets created space for community creativity and shared speculation that enriched the gaming experience beyond what any individual could achieve alone. The collective pursuit of impossibility created real social bonds and lasting memories, even when it didn't yield the promised rewards. The theory also speaks to universal human desires for discovery and the belief that the world contains hidden treasures waiting for those bold enough to seek them. Every culture has stories of secret passages, hidden rooms, and concealed treasures that reward the clever and persistent. The truck theory transforms these ancient narrative patterns into modern form, adapting age-old human desires for mystery and discovery to the specific context of digital worlds and pixel art graphics. The truck's location in a harbor adds symbolic resonance to its role in Pokémon mythology. Harbors represent departure and arrival, transition between familiar and unknown territories. The truck waits at this threshold space, suggesting journeys that might be taken, destinations that might be reached. If only the right combination of courage and knowledge could unlock its secrets. Its position near water connects it to myths of treasures hidden beneath waves, riches that exist just beyond the reach of normal exploration. The persistence of truck-related theories across different Pokémon generations demonstrates how certain symbols and locations become embedded in community consciousness, independent of their actual game mechanical significance. Even players who never experienced the original truck legend often know its story, suggesting that it has become part of Pokémon's cultural DNA, a shared reference point that helps define what it means to be part of this particular gaming community. As we drift deeper into contemplation of these theories about hidden treasures and secret places, we begin to see how they function as more than simple misinformation or wishful thinking. They represent active engagement with beloved fictional worlds, creative attempts to extend and enrich the boundaries of official content through community imagination and shared exploration. The truck theory and others like it demonstrate that the most meaningful aspects of gaming often emerge from the spaces between what exists and what we hope might exist, from the fertile ground where official content meets unlimited possibility. In the gentle space between waking and sleeping, these theories transform from specific gaming legends into broader meditations on mystery, possibility, and the human need to believe that the world contains secrets worth discovering. The truck becomes a symbol for all the hidden treasures we hope to find, all the secret passages we imagine might exist, all the mysteries that make familiar places feel full of undiscovered wonder. As we drift from contemplation of individual mysteries toward understanding how these theories have woven themselves into the cultural fabric of Pokémon communities, we encounter a phenomenon that transcends the boundaries between official and unofficial, between intended and imagined, between the stories creators tell and the stories communities create for themselves. Pokémon fan theories have evolved into something far more significant than simple speculation about fictional worlds, transforming into a form of modern folklore that binds generations of players together through shared narratives of mystery and possibility. The evolution of these theories reflects broader changes in how communities form and communicate across time and geography. In the earliest days of Pokemon's existence, theories spread through the most intimate and immediate form of human connection: children whispering secrets to each other on playgrounds, sharing discoveries that felt too important and too fragile for adult oversight. These playground conversations carried the urgent intensity that only children can bring to their most cherished obsessions. Each rumor delivered with the breathless excitement of someone sharing treasure map coordinates or ancient magic spells. The playground phase of Pokémon theory development created the foundational patterns that would shape how these stories spread and evolved for decades to come. Children naturally embellished and elaborated on the theories they heard, adding personal touches and local variations that reflected their own hopes and fears. A simple rumor about Mew hiding under a truck might transform through multiple retellings into an elaborate quest involving specific Pokémon, particular items, and ritualistic behaviors that felt appropriately complex for such an important discovery. These early theories spread through networks of trust and friendship, rather than mass communication, creating intimate bonds between the children who shared them. Knowing a secret Pokémon theory became a form of social currency, a way to demonstrate insider knowledge and special understanding of the Pokémon world that marked the difference between casual players and true believers. The theories served social functions that transcended their literal content, creating hierarchies of knowledge and opportunities for older children to mentor younger ones through the complex process of understanding hidden game mechanics and secret locations. The transition from playground whispers to internet communities marked a fundamental transformation in how Pokémon theories developed and spread. Online forums and message boards allowed fans to document their discoveries with unprecedented precision, sharing screenshots, detailed instructions, and collaborative investigations that would have been impossible through purely oral transmission. The internet democratized access to theory development while simultaneously subjecting rumors to new forms of scrutiny and verification. Early Pokémon websites became archives of community knowledge, preserving theories that might otherwise have been lost to the natural fading of childhood memory. These digital repositories allowed new players to access decades of accumulated speculation and investigation, creating continuity between generations of fans that strengthened the cultural impact of individual theories. A child discovering Pokémon for the first time in 2010 could immediately access the same truck theories and Lavender Town mysteries that had captivated players 15 years earlier, creating shared reference points across vast temporal distances. The collaborative nature of internet-based theory development introduced new dynamics that transformed how these narratives evolved. Multiple users could contribute evidence, test hypotheses, and build upon each other's discoveries in ways that created theories far more elaborate and sophisticated than any individual could have developed alone. The truck theory, for example, grew from simple curiosity about an inaccessible location into a comprehensive mythology, complete with multiple access methods, detailed exploration procedures, and elaborate explanations for why the secret might be hidden in such an unusual place. Online communities also introduced new forms of authority and expertise to Pokémon theory development. Users who demonstrated programming knowledge, who could examine game code directly, or who had access to development tools gained influence that allowed them to settle certain questions while opening up entirely new avenues for speculation. The discovery of unused Pokémon data, hidden move lists, and incomplete evolutionary lines through data mining created a new category of theories based on evidence that existed within game files, but remained inaccessible through normal gameplay. The internet age of Pokémon theories also marked the beginning of official recognition and response from the companies responsible for creating the games. Nintendo and Game Freak began acknowledging popular fan theories through subtle references in later games, creating feedback loops where community imagination influenced official content development. The lava cookie placed beneath the truck in fire red and leaf green represented just one example of how developers chose to honor community creativity while gently deflating the most persistent misconceptions. These official acknowledgments transformed the relationship between fan theories and canonical content in ways that enriched both. Rather than dismissing community speculation as irrelevant or incorrect, the developers demonstrated willingness to engage with fan imagination as a legitimate part of the Pokémon experience. This recognition validated the creative efforts of theory crafters while preserving space for new mysteries and speculation to develop around future releases. The evolution of Pokémon theories into modern folklore becomes most apparent when we examine how these narratives function within gaming communities. Like traditional folktales, Pokémon theories serve multiple purposes beyond simple entertainment or information sharing. They create shared cultural reference points that define group membership and establish common ground for communication between strangers who might have little else in common beyond their love of these games. The theories also serve pedagogical functions similar to those fulfilled by traditional folklore in other cultural contexts. Experienced players use familiar theories as teaching tools, helping newcomers understand not just specific game mechanics, but broader principles about how to approach mystery and discovery within Pokémon games. Learning about the truck theory or the Lavender Town syndrome introduces new players to the concept that Pokémon games might contain hidden depths and secret content that reward careful investigation and creative thinking. Pokémon theories function as modern creation myths, offering explanations for apparent inconsistencies or mysterious elements within the game world that official sources have left unexplained. The theory that Ditto represents failed Mew clones provides a satisfying origin story that connects seemingly unrelated Pokémon through shared history and scientific experimentation. These explanatory narratives fulfill the same human need for coherent understanding that drives traditional mythology, helping communities make sense of fictional worlds that might otherwise feel arbitrary or incomplete. The collaborative nature of Pokémon theory development also mirrors the communal aspects of traditional folklore creation and transmission. Just as folktales evolved through countless retellings that added local details and personal touches, Pokémon theories grow and change through community participation that reflects the collective imagination of their adherents. No single author can claim ownership of theories that emerge from years of collaborative speculation and investigation, creating shared cultural property that belongs to entire communities rather than individual creators. The persistence of certain theories across decades and platforms demonstrates how some narratives achieve folkloric status that transcends their original context. The truck theory remains known to Pokémon fans who never played the original Game Boy games, passed down through community tradition rather than direct experience. These enduring theories become part of Pokémon's cultural DNA, shared reference points that help define what it means to be part of this particular gaming community. The social functions of Pokémon theories extend beyond simple entertainment to encompass identity formation and community building in ways that mirror how traditional folklore operates in cultural contexts. Knowing and sharing these theories becomes a way of demonstrating cultural literacy and group membership, distinguishing between insiders who understand community traditions and outsiders who lack access to shared knowledge and experiences. The theories also provide frameworks for creative expression that allow community members to contribute to shared narratives without requiring official recognition or commercial success. A fan who develops an elaborate explanation for an apparent inconsistency in Pokémon lore participates in the same kind of creative world-building that professional game developers engage in, contributing to the collective understanding and appreciation of fictional universes that extend far beyond their original commercial boundaries. The emergence of Pokémon theories as folklore also reflects broader changes in how modern communities form and maintain cultural traditions in an increasingly digital and globalized world. Traditional folklore often emerged from geographical communities, bound together by shared physical spaces and face-to-face interactions. But Pokémon theories create cultural cohesion across vast distances and diverse populations, united only by shared interests and digital connectivity. These digital folk traditions demonstrate remarkable resilience and adaptability, surviving platform changes, corporate restructuring, and generational transitions that might have destroyed more fragile cultural phenomena. The core narratives persist while adapting to new contexts and technologies, maintaining their essential functions while evolving to address contemporary concerns and possibilities. The academic study of digital folklore has begun recognizing gaming communities as legitimate sources of folkloric creation, acknowledging that the same human impulses that generated traditional folktales continue to operate in modern contexts through new media and communication technologies. Pokémon theories represent just one example of how digital communities create, share, and preserve cultural narratives that serve many of the same functions as traditional folklore, while adapting to contemporary technological and social conditions. The international nature of Pokémon as a cultural phenomenon has also created unique opportunities for cross-cultural folklore development that would have been impossible in pre-digital eras. Theories that originate in Japanese gaming communities can spread to Western audiences within hours, while local variations and interpretations can develop simultaneously in dozens of different countries and languages. This global collaboration creates folklore that transcends national boundaries while still maintaining local characteristics and cultural adaptations. The translation and adaptation of Pokémon theories across linguistic and cultural boundaries reveals how these narratives function as truly universal forms of human expression. The core psychological needs that drive theory development, the desire for mystery, explanation, and community connection, appear to operate consistently across diverse cultural contexts, creating shared experiences that bridge differences in language, nationality, and social background. The corporate response to Pokémon folklore development has generally been more positive and engaging than traditional media companies' relationships with fan communities, suggesting new models for how commercial entertainment can coexist with grassroots cultural creation. Rather than viewing fan theories as potential copyright violations or threats to official narratives, Pokémon's creators have generally embraced community speculation as valuable additions to the franchise's cultural impact and longevity. This collaborative relationship between official and unofficial content creation has created precedents for how digital folklore can influence commercial entertainment in mutually beneficial ways. Fan theories generate sustained interest and engagement that extends the commercial lifespan of entertainment properties while providing free market research and creative input that can inform future official development. The success of this model in the Pokémon context has influenced how other gaming companies approach community speculation and creative fan engagement. The preservation of Pokémon folklore through digital archives, wiki projects, and community documentation efforts represents a new form of cultural preservation that operates outside traditional institutional frameworks. Unlike traditional folklore that might be lost when communities dispersed or cultural transmission was interrupted, digital folklore can be preserved indefinitely and remain accessible to future generations, regardless of changes in community structure or communication technology. These preservation efforts also create opportunities for historical analysis and cultural study that would be impossible with traditional folklore that existed only in oral transmission. Researchers can now trace the precise evolution of individual theories, identify key contributors and moments of transformation, and analyze how digital communities create and maintain shared cultural narratives over extended periods. The educational potential of Pokémon folklore extends beyond gaming communities to encompass broader lessons about digital literacy, critical thinking, and collaborative creativity that have applications far beyond entertainment contexts. The process of developing, testing, and refining theories about fictional worlds teaches valuable skills in hypothesis formation, evidence evaluation, and collaborative problem-solving that transfer to academic and professional contexts. The ethical dimensions of Pokémon folklore development also raise interesting questions about intellectual property, creative ownership, and the relationship between commercial entertainment and grassroots cultural creation. The collaborative nature of theory development makes traditional notions of authorship and ownership difficult to apply, while the incorporation of fan ideas into official content creates complex questions about recognition and compensation for community contributions. As we drift deeper into appreciation of how Pokémon theories function as modern folklore, we begin to see how they represent much more than simple speculation about fictional worlds. They demonstrate the persistent human need for mystery, explanation, and community connection that adapts to new technologies and contexts while maintaining its essential character across cultural and temporal boundaries. These theories create shared experiences that bind communities together while preserving space for individual creativity and expression within collaborative frameworks. The evolution from playground whispers to global digital folklore represents a transformation in how human communities create and share meaning, but the underlying psychological and social needs that drive this process remain consistent across all contexts. Pokémon theories fulfill ancient human desires for stories that explain, connect, and inspire, proving that even the most modern forms of entertainment can serve the same fundamental functions as the oldest forms of human cultural expression. In the gentle space between waking and sleeping, these reflections on folklore and community creation take on a dreamlike quality that transcends their specific application to Pokémon or gaming contexts. They become meditations on how human creativity operates within technological constraints, how communities form around shared interests and imagination, and how the stories we tell ourselves and each other shape our understanding of both fictional worlds and lived experience. As we near the end of our gentle journey through the landscape of Pokémon theories and mysteries, we find ourselves drawn toward deeper contemplation of why these unexplained connections and unsolved puzzles hold such enduring power over our imagination. Beyond the specific details of trucks and legendary beasts, beyond questions of identity and transformation, lies a more fundamental question about the human relationship with mystery itself, and why we seem to need unexplained elements in the stories we love most deeply. The preservation of mystery in fictional worlds serves purposes that extend far beyond simple entertainment or puzzle solving. Mystery creates space for imagination to flourish, providing gaps in official knowledge that communities can fill with their own creative speculation and collaborative storytelling. These spaces of uncertainty become fertile ground, where individual minds can contribute to collective understanding, where the boundaries between official and unofficial narrative blur into something richer and more complex than either could achieve alone. Pokémon theories demonstrate how mystery functions as an invitation rather than an obstacle, drawing us deeper into fictional worlds by suggesting that there are always more secrets to discover, more connections to uncover, more possibilities to explore. The truck theory persisted not because it was likely to be true, but because it represented the tantalizing possibility that dedicated investigation might reveal something wonderful, hidden just beyond the boundaries of normal experience. The theory transformed a simple, inaccessible location into a symbol of all the undiscovered treasures that might reward those bold enough to look beyond surface appearances. This transformation of mundane elements into sources of wonder reflects a fundamental aspect of how mystery operates in human psychology. We are naturally drawn to patterns that seem significant but remain incomplete, connections that feel meaningful but resist easy explanation, possibilities that hover just at the edge of our understanding. These partial revelations activate our pattern-seeking minds while preserving enough ambiguity to sustain continued interest and speculation. The most enduring Pokémon theories share this quality of productive ambiguity, providing enough evidence to feel plausible while maintaining enough uncertainty to fuel ongoing investigation and debate. The theory connecting Genesect to Kabutops offers compelling parallels in timeline, behavior, and physical structure, while remaining officially unconfirmed, creating space for fans to explore the implications and build upon the foundational evidence with their own observations and interpretations. Mystery also serves as a form of democratization within fictional worlds, creating opportunities for every community member to contribute meaningfully to collective understanding, regardless of their official role or recognized expertise. A casual player who notices an unusual pattern or connection can contribute as much to community knowledge as someone with extensive programming skills or insider information. Mystery creates space where careful observation and creative thinking matter more than formal credentials or institutional authority. The collaborative nature of mystery solving in Pokémon communities demonstrates how uncertainty can become a catalyst for social connection and shared purpose. The process of developing theories brings together players with different skills, perspectives, and areas of knowledge, creating temporary partnerships focused on common goals of understanding and discovery. These collaborations often outlast the specific mysteries that inspired them, evolving into lasting friendships and ongoing creative relationships. The social dynamics surrounding Pokémon mysteries also reveal how uncertainty can create healthy forms of disagreement and debate that strengthen rather than divide communities. When official answers don't exist, different interpretations of the same evidence can coexist without requiring anyone to be definitively wrong. Multiple theories about Cubone's origins or N's true nature can all contribute value to community discourse without necessarily contradicting each other, creating space for diverse perspectives and creative approaches to shared questions. Mystery preservation also serves important functions in maintaining long-term engagement with fictional worlds that might otherwise become stale or predictable. Through complete explanation, official lore that answers every question and explains every connection can sometimes diminish the sense of wonder and possibility that draws people to fictional worlds in the first place. By preserving certain elements as mysterious or ambiguous, creators and communities maintain space for imagination and speculation that keeps fictional worlds feeling alive and dynamic. The Pokémon franchise has generally demonstrated wisdom in its approach to balancing revelation and mystery, providing enough official information to create coherent narratives while preserving enough ambiguity to support ongoing fan speculation and creative interpretation. The developers' decision to acknowledge fan theories through subtle references, rather than explicit confirmations or denials, shows understanding of how mystery functions as a valuable community resource that deserves protection rather than elimination. The relationship between official explanations and fan theories reveals complex dynamics around authority, creativity, and ownership in fictional worlds. When developers provide official answers to long-standing mysteries, they risk disappointing fans whose personal theories have become emotionally meaningful, but they also create opportunities to surprise and delight communities with revelations that exceed expectations. The most successful official revelations seem to be those that honor the spirit of fan speculation while adding unexpected elements that create new mysteries to replace the ones being resolved. The evolution of Pokémon theories over time also demonstrates how mystery can serve as a form of cultural memory, preserving community experiences and values that might otherwise be lost as new generations replace older ones. Long-standing theories carry within them the history of community speculation and investigation, maintaining connection to earlier eras of Pokémon culture while continuing to evolve and adapt to contemporary concerns and possibilities. The educational value of mystery in fictional contexts extends beyond the specific skills involved in theory development and testing. Engaging with unsolved questions teaches valuable lessons about living with uncertainty, tolerating ambiguity, and finding satisfaction in partial understanding rather than demanding complete knowledge. These skills transfer to real-world contexts, where many important questions lack clear answers, and where the ability to function effectively despite incomplete information becomes essential for personal and professional success. Mystery also provides opportunities for practicing intellectual humility, recognizing the limitations of individual knowledge and the value of collaborative approaches to complex questions. Pokémon theory development requires willingness to consider alternative perspectives, revise initial assumptions based on new evidence, and acknowledge when preferred theories lack sufficient support. These practices of intellectual flexibility and openness serve individuals well in many contexts beyond gaming communities. The aesthetic dimensions of mystery in Pokémon contexts reveal how uncertainty can enhance rather than diminish the beauty and emotional impact of fictional narratives. The theory that the legendary beasts were once evolutions gains power not from its factual accuracy, but from the poetic resonance of its narrative elements. Transformation through tragedy, resurrection through divine compassion, the preservation of essential identity despite radical change. The uncertainty surrounding this theory preserves its emotional power by preventing it from becoming mere factual information rather than meaningful story. The relationship between mystery and meaning in Pokémon theories suggests that some forms of understanding transcend factual knowledge and enter territory that resembles spiritual or aesthetic experience. The truck theory creates meaning not through its literal truth, but through its function as symbol and focal point for community hope and dedication. The meaning exists independent of the theory's accuracy, residing instead in the shared experiences and connections it facilitates among community members. The temporal aspects of mystery in Pokémon contexts reveal how uncertainty can create different relationships with fictional worlds that transcend the normal boundaries of entertainment consumption. Ongoing mysteries create reasons to return repeatedly to familiar content, discovering new details and connections that might have been missed in previous encounters. This iterative engagement deepens appreciation and understanding in ways that would be impossible through single interactions with completely explained narratives. Mystery also creates unique forms of nostalgia and emotional attachment that differ from simple fondness for familiar content. The memory of wondering about unsolved questions, of participating in community speculation and investigation, becomes part of individual and collective identity in ways that create lasting emotional bonds with fictional worlds. These bonds often prove more durable than attachments based purely on narrative satisfaction or gameplay enjoyment. The psychological functions of mystery in Pokémon contexts mirror needs that appear throughout human culture and experience. The desire to believe that familiar places harbor hidden treasures, that ordinary objects might conceal extraordinary secrets, that careful observation might reveal patterns invisible to casual notice, all reflect deep-seated human needs for wonder and possibility that transcend specific fictional contexts. These needs seem particularly acute in contemporary culture, where scientific explanation and technological accessibility have eliminated many of the mysteries that previous generations took for granted. Pokémon theories provide safe spaces for exercising faculties of wonder and speculation that might otherwise lack appropriate outlets, creating opportunities to experience the excitement of discovery and the satisfaction of collaborative investigation without the risks or limitations associated with real-world mystery solving. The preservation of mystery in Pokémon contexts also serves as implicit resistance to cultural trends toward complete explanation and immediate accessibility of information. In a world where internet searches can instantly answer most factual questions, Pokémon theories create spaces where questions persist, where answers must be worked for rather than simply looked up, where the journey of investigation matters as much as any destination it might reach. The communal aspects of mystery preservation in Pokémon contexts demonstrate how uncertainty can become a form of cultural commons, shared resources that belong to entire communities rather than individual owners. Unlike official content that remains under corporate control, community-developed theories become collective property that can be freely shared, modified, and built upon by anyone who chooses to participate in their development. This democratic aspect of Pokémon mysteries creates opportunities for creative expression and community contribution that operate outside commercial frameworks while still enriching the overall cultural impact of the franchise. Fan theories add value to official content without competing directly with commercial interests, creating mutually beneficial relationships between corporate and grassroots creativity. The international and intergenerational transmission of Pokémon mysteries demonstrates how certain forms of uncertainty can transcend cultural and temporal boundaries to create shared human experiences. Children discovering Pokémon for the first time today can participate in the same mysteries that captivated players decades ago, creating continuity of experience that bridges generational differences and cultural variations. This continuity suggests that the mysteries preserved in Pokémon theories address fundamental human needs and interests that remain consistent across different cultural contexts and historical periods. The specific details may vary with technological and social changes, but the underlying psychological functions of mystery and wonder remain constant, ensuring that these theories continue to find receptive audiences regardless of changes in gaming technology or cultural trends. The artistic dimensions of Pokémon mystery preservation reveal how uncertainty can function as a form of collaborative creativity that emerges from community participation rather than individual authorship. The truck theory becomes a kind of folk art, shaped by countless contributors and evolving through community interaction in ways that no single creator could have planned or controlled. These collaborative artistic processes create cultural artifacts that belong to entire communities rather than individual artists. The therapeutic potential of Pokémon Mysteries extends beyond simple entertainment to encompass real psychological benefits for individuals dealing with stress, uncertainty, or social isolation in their personal lives. Participating in community theory development provides opportunities for meaningful social connection, intellectual stimulation, and creative expression that can support mental health and personal well-being in ways that purely passive entertainment consumption cannot achieve. The sense of agency and empowerment that comes from contributing to community knowledge and understanding provides particular value for individuals who might feel powerless or marginalized in other contexts. Pokémon theory development creates spaces where careful observation, creative thinking, and collaborative communication are valued and rewarded regardless of participants' age, formal education, or social status. As we drift toward the conclusion of our exploration of Pokémon mysteries and their deeper significance, we begin to see how these theories function as more than entertainment or even community-building activities. They represent fundamental human capacities for wonder, creativity, and collaborative meaning-making that operate through new media and technologies while serving ancient psychological and social functions. The preservation of mystery in Pokémon contexts demonstrates that even in an age of unprecedented access to information and explanation, human beings continue to need spaces for speculation, imagination, and collaborative discovery. These needs appear to be fundamental aspects of human psychology that adapt to new contexts and technologies, while maintaining their essential character across cultural and historical boundaries. The communities that form around Pokémon mysteries create models for how digital technologies can support meaningful human connection and creative collaboration, while preserving space for individual expression and diverse perspectives. These communities demonstrate that shared uncertainty can be as powerful a basis for social bonding as shared knowledge or beliefs, creating inclusive spaces where curiosity and creativity matter more than expertise or authority. In the gentle space between waking and sleeping, these reflections on mystery and meaning take on a dreamlike quality that transcends their specific application to Pokémon or gaming contexts. They become meditations on wonder itself, on the human capacity to find magic in the mundane and meaning in the uncertain, on the ways that questions can sometimes be more valuable than answers and mysteries more precious than solutions. The theories we have explored tonight serve as reminders that the most important aspects of human experience often exist in the spaces between certainty and doubt, between knowing and wondering, between explanation and mystery. They preserve access to forms of thinking and feeling that risk being lost in cultures that prioritize efficiency and explanation over wonder and possibility, creating sanctuaries for the kinds of curiosity and creativity that make life meaningful rather than merely functional. As our gentle journey through the mysteries and theories of the Pokémon world draws to a close, we find ourselves settling into the peaceful space where questions fade and wonder transforms into dreams. The stories we've explored tonight, from ancient connections between legendary beasts and beloved evolutions to modern folklore born in digital communities, begin to blend together like watercolors in the rain, their sharp edges softening into something that feels more like memory than analysis. Let your mind drift away from the need to solve these mysteries, or determine which theories hold truth and which exist only in imagination. In this quiet moment, such distinctions matter less than the beauty of the wondering itself. The way these stories have brought communities together across decades and continents, the manner in which they've preserved space for magic and possibility in worlds that might otherwise feel completely mapped and understood. Imagine yourself walking through a tranquil Pokémon landscape as evening settles over the land. The air is warm and still, filled with the gentle sounds of Pokémon returning to their resting places for the night. In the distance, you can see the soft glow of a lighthouse where an Ampharos tends its beacon, ensuring safe passage for travelers making their way home. Nearby, a group of Muna drift peacefully through the air, their pink forms barely visible in the gathering dusk as they seek dreams to share and nightmares to chase away. The theories we've explored begin to take physical form in this peaceful world, but they've lost their urgent need for resolution. The truck sits quietly by the harbor, no longer a source of desperate speculation, but simply part of the landscape, its mystery preserved not as frustration, but as gentle reminder that some secrets are more beautiful when they remain hidden. The legendary beasts move through distant forests, their origins unimportant now that we can appreciate their grace and power without needing to categorize or explain their existence. Cubone rests peacefully beneath a tree, its eternal mourning transformed into acceptance and quiet strength. Blue sits by a campfire with his Pokémon team, their bonds untroubled by questions of loss or grief, strengthened instead by the journey they've shared together. N walks through a meadow where Zoroark plays freely among other Pokémon, the question of identity dissolved into simple appreciation for the connections that transcend species and understanding. The mysteries themselves become Pokémon in this dreaming world, gentle creatures that drift through the landscape, bringing wonder and possibility wherever they go. The truck theory manifests as a friendly guide that leads explorers to hidden treasures, no longer cruel in its empty promises, but generous in the adventures it inspires. The ancient war theory becomes a healing presence that helps communities recover from trauma and build stronger bonds of cooperation and mutual support. As you walk deeper into this peaceful landscape, you feel the weight of analysis and investigation lifting from your shoulders like a heavy pack finally set down after a long journey. The need to prove or disprove these theories, to settle their claims or dismiss their possibilities, fades into irrelevance. What remains is appreciation for the creativity they represent, gratitude for the communities they've fostered, and wonder at the human capacity to find meaning and connection in the spaces between certainty and doubt. The Pokémon around you settle into their evening routines, Snorlax finding comfortable places to sleep, Noctowl preparing for their gentle vigil through the night, Clefairy gathering to dance under moonlight that asks nothing more than to be witnessed and appreciated. The legendary Pokémon that have figured in so many of our theories rest peacefully in their sacred spaces, no longer burdened by human need to understand and categorize their powers, content simply to exist as guardians of mystery and wonder. Ho-Oh glides silently overhead, its rainbow wings catching the last light of day as it watches over all the sleeping Pokémon and dreaming humans below. Its presence brings not answers but benediction, not explanation but blessing, ensuring that the capacity for wonder and the willingness to believe in magic will survive even the most determined efforts to explain everything away. The gentle sound of waves lapping against the harbor dock mingles with the soft breathing of sleeping Pokémon and the whispered conversation of night-dwelling creatures beginning their quiet activities. The truck sits peacefully among these sounds, no longer an object of desperate searching but a familiar landmark that marks the boundary between the known and the unknown, between what we can grasp and what we must be content to wonder about from a distance. As the last light fades from the sky, the theories and mysteries we've explored begin their own transformation, shifting from objects of investigation into companions for dreams, sources of gentle narrative that can carry sleeping minds through peaceful hours toward morning. They ask nothing more of you now than to rest, to let them work their quiet magic without the burden of conscious analysis or the pressure of reaching conclusions. The Pokémon world settles into deepest night, a place where all possibilities coexist peacefully, where every theory finds its place without contradicting others, where mystery and explanation dance together in harmony that transcends the need for resolution. In this space, you can finally let go of questions and simply drift with the stories, allowing them to carry you deeper into rest, surrounded by the gentle presence of creatures both real and imagined, both explained and mysterious, all of them watching over your sleep with the infinite patience that comes from existing in a world where wonder never ends, and every dream contains the seed of new adventures, waiting to unfold in the morning light.